Anime World War II, a concept that would break lesser men. For more than a few good reasons. Once titled Galleon Panzers during development, Valkyria Chronicles is one of the most successful expressions of tactical gameplay rendered in 3D space. Vital, emergent, an instant classic, now sketched into memory as one of gaming's very greatest. And then they made another one. People wonder when Anime World War II is gonna end. Sometimes a truly enduring story is one people can't help telling forever, because it grasped at something deeper, resonated, you know? Like, I'm pretty sure it did that. Valkyria Chronicles boldly asks, can love bloom, even on a battlefield, a decade after the question was originally posed? A decade after the question was originally answered.
If you love someone, you should come inside the box.
Valkyria Chronicles earnestly asks, exactly how many of these games need dedicated bathing suit scenes? 4 out of 5. Making this a series with a little something for everyone. I joke, but that's not even kind of inaccurate. Valkyria Chronicles was a critical success and quickly spiraled into a capital F franchise. There's Valkyria Anime. Manga was produced specifically to spread the total reach of the brand. There was a mobile card game that ended service years ago, and even drama CDs. Turns out folks really like Anime World War II. But why? The original concept was penned in 2003. Ryotaro Nanaka, the producer for Nightshade, and Shuntaro Tanaka, the director for Skies of Arcadia, wanted to break the mold a bit, make something ambitious that would speak to people, instead of pumping out the same old stuff year over year. Tanaka had a war story in mind, and both parties previously worked on Sakura Wars, but also understood that handling an established property would lead to restrictions, so they pitched something different. A dramatic wartime tactics game blending action and RPG elements, a system that would put the player directly onto the battlefield. So, with a fresh concept, a heap of industry talent, and a history of Sakura Wars swimwear scenes informing their most ambitious project yet, Valkyria Chronicles team made history. Valkyria Chronicles is a war story. The small, resource-rich Gallia is attacked by the East European Imperial Alliance, shortened to the Empire, and receives military support from the Atlantic Federation. This is a setting with history, an alternate Earth with just enough swapped names and specifics to create plausible deniability, but very clearly expecting some basic pattern recognition. The game is centered on a politically neutral nation, which was originally invaded by the Empire in the First European War, aka EW1, and assisted by the Federation to pull through. That was 20 years ago. Now history is repeating itself for what's shaping up to be EW2, hence why people pithily call it Anime World War II. Cause sure, it looks older, it's rustic, but that's the setting, and mountains of historical references and design inspiration make it plain. It smacks so loudly of nostalgia because it's dripped up like the Les Miserables anime, Daddy Longlegs anime. But a lot of the historical minutiae fades into the background because the more immediate drama is centered around the player and their actions. Sure, the Atlantic Federation is coming to help, but from the player's point of view, the war is all you and the Empire. Thankfully, the rules of warfare are firmly established here. They're gonna give you all the time you need on your turn. If you could just let me get the aiming right. Valkyria Chronicles puts the player in command of a squad of handpicked soldiers as Welkin Gunther, the son of a prominent general. His special interest is ecology, and he has no interest in war, making him the perfect candidate for squadron command. I want to make a joke about his role as a function of nepotism, but his father is dead, making his placement as commander a function of his education, which opened the door to officer courses. He's young talent, Gallia's next generation, which serves the narrative incredibly well. You know, Big Dick Damon here puffs and harumphs about your plucky nobody crew, then gets his ass rolled down the meadow, and you're sent in to clean up his mess by, like, utilizing animal trails or some bullshit. And that's how the front was won. Welkin's supported by his adoptive engineer sister, Isara, and local thug Alicia Melchiot.
Freeze! Put your hands in the air. Slowly.
Okay, maybe let's save the dick swanging contest for peace times. You team up with your fellow country folk and push back the invading empire in a string of surreal successes that'll set your name squarely in the history books. if you can actually get past the boss in Stage 9. Valkyria Chronicles flits between two phases, prep and deployment. You enlist a balanced squad, gear them up with whatever money you've got, and hit the field in stop-start action to drive the invaders out of your country. It's sharp, punishing, and creates some of the highest highs in all of tactics gaming when you finally pull through what seems like an impossible challenge. But it's a bit harder to understand than it looks, like mechanically. You pick your unit, zoom into third-person view, and assume control. You're free to move, aim, shoot, duck behind cover, etc., but you can't move with impunity. Hang around near enemies and they'll shoot bullets until you're dead. You've got to be ready to crouch behind sandbags or pick a move and do it. You only have so many moves per turn. Your units get tired. Repeatedly picking the same character has diminishing returns. You're incentivized to control a small group and creep forward, slowly gaining control of the battlefield. It just looks cool, doesn't it? No other game does the same thing. More tactics games are strictly 2D or approximate 3D space, but don't often put you in the shoes of your individual units, don't often grant the player that level of micromanagement and intimacy. You can order your black mage to face one of 4 directions, or your cowboy to duck behind cover, but here, in 3D space, I can maneuver my scout behind the terrain, non-standard cover, under fire, and heal. And that is incredible, empowering. It flavors Valkyria Chronicles in a mechanically personal way that's always exciting. Lets you feel like you're cheating the system or fighting against it, especially when you're not getting your head blown off.
Oh cool, the counterplay is, don't stand there.
So why is it that almost any time I mentioned that I was playing Valkyria Chronicles, someone in my circle said, "Yeah, I played that. Stop partway through though." There's something lurking behind those saccharine visuals, something sinister.
Here I go! Yippee!
Girl, you just painted the street with that dude's head! Yippee! Valkyria Chronicles has an entirely fresh aesthetic, at least for video games. It isn't just cel-shaded or anime or whatever. It's a style produced by Sega's own Canvas engine, which captures the underlying models in a sketchy style. Pencil on paper. Everything's textured. It lends a sort of importance to the presentation. If the game is a retelling of a series of fictional historical events, it demands matching visuals. Valkyria Chronicles is loosely based on a mix of World War I's and II's historical touchstones. At its core, it's a romanticized version of Europe. Cobblestone, windmills, and fields. The setting slowly transitions from idyllic countryside to no man's land, but it's a slow transition, taking the time to ground the player in the world, in its forests, its towns. And we see those beautiful places degrade as the protracted conflict forces combatants to entrench themselves, dig in for survival. It very intentionally inspires a sort of pride, a protective instinct in the player. It keys into a confabulated fictional nationalism engendered by its environments to inspire the player to press forward. And that's impressive. You know, as far as I know, this monarchy I'm fighting for totally sucks. But honestly, bro, get your cannons off my damn windmill or we're gonna throw hands! You might think fantastical elements would degrade the artistic cohesion to some extent. It's a game playing at real-world inspirations, so shouldn't it be low-key, down-to-earth? But video games do well with visual signatures. In this case, I'm referring to Ragnite, the contrived superfuel that powers a number of technological advancements in the setting, and unsurprisingly, ends up on the battlefield. Superfuels are easy. They don't have any scientific basis, everybody uses them. Ghost Rock in Deadlands, whale oil in Dishonored, what's next? Human pus? Donkey cum? But here, nestled in these soft palettes and sketchy style, the saturated hue of Ragnite-powered tech is actually a powerful fragment of visual language. It doesn't fit. It's perverse by design. Ragnite, clashing as it does with the trademark Valkyria aesthetic, is both instantly recognizable and untrustworthy. The first time you come across a tank, something you can't meaningfully damage at that point, it chugs along in firing range, taunting you, drawing fire from whoever is closest, revealing that big blue Ragnite radiator. Oh, I get it. Ragnite isn't just for fun. Ragnite is a problem. It also gets used for grenades in the self-medicating Ragnade, implying its overuse and instantly justifying the war, laying out the stakes. Of course, people are gonna fight over this stuff. It can cure wounds. It's like Jesus in a bottle, bro. It creates explosions, powers technology, and all of those implicit understandings are maximized with the use of a single color. I hope this isn't tiresome, but to be clear, Valkyria Chronicles knows exactly what medium it's in, and does inspiring work with such small choices. That actually describes a lot of the game, small choices that add up to an aesthetic triumph. And I'm including the anime stylings in that, by the way. But one of the first things people do when they talk about Valkyria Chronicles is pull you aside into an alleyway where nobody is and go, "Hey buddy, did you know a portrait artist did the character designs?" No, but now I do, and honestly, I hope he's a fetish artist, so I know he's actually good at his job. For all the whispering and tittering, the character designs are incredibly conservative, only jarring when they're a little too weathered and masculine for the relatively baby-faced vibe, or like outright magical. When you see a character who's a little more than human, you recognize it instantly.
Hey, soldier! I'm Jan Walker.
Veterans visually clash with greenhorns, and it gives a necessary sense of contrast. The designs get a little looser as the series creeps on, but the game still manages to establish individuality for its diverse personalities. We could spend forever talking about the costume design process, but I think it's easiest to say they wanted to evoke history without recreating it, and it's maybe the greatest success of the game, creating a recognizably nostalgic setting in spite of the visual quirks. Most of my enthusiasm for the series is rooted in this original title because it created the others, and of those titles, it's one of the cleanest. Yeah, mechanics differ slightly in the main entries, new units get added, etc., but the core of play found here never leaves the series, except for Revolution, but no, not inflicting you with that right now. These kinds of games usually have classes, and Valkyria Chronicles does too, but they're not handled like FFT. You will not be changing classes in most of these games. That ruthlessly outdated stereotype character knows exactly what he likes. Individual units don't gain experience. Instead, you train whole classes up between missions by expending XP earned in battle. This gives you a degree of control over your army. You don't have to sweat one class getting overleveled or one unit stealing the show, because everyone comes up together and you allocate those points yourself. It's narratively justified as routine combat training at home base. You're probably thinking, well, how do individual units stand out then? Isn't that entirely contradictory to the ethos of a class-based tactics game? Shouldn't my favorite war hero become stronger with use? Valkyria Chronicles actually anticipates that question. Firstly, you unlock unique weapons, like better than standard issue weapons, for good performance, and you can hand those to whoever you want. There's still some room for favoritism, but the game understands that individuals do not win wars. War demands soldiers. This basic reality demands a lot of characters. You can't have them outshining each other, but you can develop your own interest in whoever stands out to you. People win wars. Manpower wins wars. Numbers, efficiency, critical actions. And for the most part, those realities of war de-emphasize the tactician, the commander. Someone's gotta direct, but regular old human resources still do the heavy lifting. This ain't about glory, or shoving every stat-boosting item down the throat of your now godly Fire Emblem super unit. It's about the tactics. I appreciate that Welkin, the commander, is holed up in his tank for most of the game, barring a few special missions, because honestly, he isn't much of a fighter. He gives out critical orders, stat-boosting power-ups that can completely warp the outcome of a battle, but he can't solo the game. And he's not even driving the tank. He's just the gunman. Isara's down there, making command of Squad 7 a joint venture. I keep implying that Valkyria Chronicles cares about individuals, but how can that be if individual combat achievements are diminished? Well, it's thanks to the potential system. Introducing Potential Man. One day he's gonna do something. Potentials are passive traits unique to each character, along with a handful of class-specific potentials you unlock as you level them up. Some characters are better in cities, some get a bonus from touching grass. Potentials are an obvious mechanical extension of the narrative. You can tell a story with these.
I'm gonna kill their whole shit off.
Alicia has a mysterious body because she has the blood of the Valkyria. This guy's got Darkson hair. Whoa. Racism is mechanically accounted for. Characters with the Darkson hater potential become ill in the presence of Darkson, reducing their stats by a whopping percentage. It's actually impressive. Not only does bigotry make you a weaker, more pathetic person, it's genuinely challenging. Per the rules underpinning the system, to work as a team toward a common goal. It's a weakness you're made to overcome. Segregating incompatible people is mechanically rewarded in this system. And it's hard to call that a bad thing, how you might think, like, oh wow, really? You're making it easier to be bigoted, huh? What did they mean by this? But it extends beyond bigotry. Some characters are uncomfortable around men or women, whether because they have a preference or they're icked out. Some characters function better alone. The goal is in considering each person's place in your plan, considering who's working with who and how they might affect each other, forcing you to think about other people and consider their preferences. We might not change the world right now, but we're gonna get there together. In this way, Valkyria Chronicles is a mechanically empathetic game. It's also just really, really funny imagining Glenn Beck with a 40% all-around debuff because he saw a Muslim. Tanks might look overpowered, but they really aren't. They're immune to most regular gunfire, though they suck up 2 of your precious moves to control at all, something that's peeled back in the sequels because tanks don't mechanically justify that level of opportunity cost. If anything, the armor is necessary because once the tank's gone, the mission's over. And Valkyria Chronicles may be an intimidating game to learn, but you're still very vulnerable to tank-busting lance fire from units who can end your mission instantly if they get a clean shot at your Ragnite radiator. Canonically, Valkyria Chronicles is a game about a virgin tank whose cherry is never popped. The suboptimal reality of tanks is a function of how combat is ordered. Every unit has a particular use, some more particular than others, but you're effectively forced to make use of a well-rounded army. At least, that's the intention. Scouts are the bedrock of gameplay. Someone has to run long distances, break up entrenched units with grenades, and capture critical points. The scout ends up being the most reliable unit type, bar none, because once accuracy is no longer a factor with gun upgrades, scouts can frankly do more, and more often than other members of your army. Take down that encampment, shoot a guy dead, pick up your friend off the ground with their superior movement, dig in tight. Their only real drawbacks are poor firepower and poor defense, but they're so packed with utility, it's hard to imagine not slapping a few down every time you deploy. Once they're upgraded, you can fire grenades at range, which gives them additional tactical utility and protects them from immediate danger. Shock troopers are the other half of your core. Someone's got to deal the damage, and they can stomach a few more hits than the average unit. They're limited by a short sprint distance, but they can kill at range, pack enough damage to fell a couple dudes in one burst, and have many of the same utilities as scouts. Once firing range and accuracy are solved with weapon upgrades, they quickly outpace most classes for general use, especially because leaving them crouched behind cover is your strongest defensive option and will chew through oncoming soldiers. Upgrading them unlocks flamethrowers, which can burn units through their defensive positions and take out key fortifications, making them mandatory.
You suck.
Lancers are a stroke of brilliance because every tactical game has the unit you just hate. Most of those games don't make those units critical, and that's a missed design opportunity. Lancers can kill, but they're wildly inaccurate. They can take a hit or two, but they're real slow. You almost never want to use them except against tanks, which they completely obliterate, given you aim well, and don't get shredded with gunfire on the way round back. They're instantly more useful than any other class in that regard, but awful everywhere else. And this presents a challenge. Suddenly you have to employ the Lancer to make tanks manageable, but you also need to work around their weaknesses in real time, account for their mobility, account for their awful accuracy. This kind of unit creates incredibly triumphant moments when you dome a guy through sheer luck or land that perfect hit before a catastrophic crackback. They texture the experience, and it's beautiful. There was a 6th class, by the way, the Medic, which was removed, and I think the game is better for it. They still save your fallen units from battle, stuck forever in a cutscene. But if they limited healing to one class, instead of handing Ragnade to regular units, the game would become far more punishing than necessary. Tactics games already struggle with player retention. No need to make every mistake a hard reset. I'm not as sold on the other 2 classes. Snipers are legitimately useful for taking out key targets at range. Have you guys ever heard of this phenomenon? Snipers are useful for taking out targets at range, but there aren't a lot of targets that need handling at that range, except for other snipers because your biggest threats are often enemy tanks, handled by lancers. And if we're talking about later entries, most boss enemies are better managed with shock troopers. Snipers have limited ammo as well, meaning they need to be supported or called back and redeployed for continued sniping. And until they're upgraded, can't even fire back. This woman's getting floored by a stiff breeze, man. Why'd I even field you? So snipers act as proactive support units more than boss killers. They take out key targets to clear a path or secure safety for your other units, but you almost never need one. It's a smart choice in the end. Give them bottomless ammo and the game would allow for incredible passivity, which would still be narratively interesting. The numbers are against you. Snipers carrying damage, shock troopers preventing rushes, but the blitz system... I'm sorry. But the blitz system is an exciting, active framework, and the game itself is about brilliant victories in the face of impossible odds. It wouldn't serve the story. Engineers have bad offense, bad defense, rough movement, high utility, but in a game with so many kinds of units to feed XP to, they're almost always going to be the lowest priority in any given playthrough, and lose their opportunity to shine because of it. I'm just saying, in D&D, one stat's gotta be the dump. Someone's got to fix the tank, someone's got to build the ladders, but Valkyria Chronicles is not a sandbox tactics title, okay? Anything goes, technically, but not mechanically. You can't freely set up ladders wherever you want, it's contextual. Actually, that's not even in this game, that's a later thing. Most main units resupply their own ammo, people can heal themselves, tanks aren't critical, and honestly a bit of an action sponge. The reality of Valkyria Chronicles does not suit the engineer, and it's a shame, because I maintain that stigma throughout the entire series, using them only when absolutely required, which wasn't much. But maybe the engineer speaks to a broader mechanical liquidity. You can trick your tank out in all kinds of ways, you can field whatever you want, and it's possible any given player might make more use of the class than I ever did, because in spite of the specificity of combat, the rock, paper, scissors inherent to regular play, there's still room for player choice. You don't have a Lancer but need this tank gone? Pop the demolition order earned by training up Lancers to level 8. Now, for a single round, your shock trooper hits almost like a Lancer. Don't let me spin Valkyria Chronicles as one thing. Its system allows for very different play experiences created by overvaluing one or more of the classes. You might not get a ton of mileage sinking as much experience as possible into the sniper or engineer. They're supporting units by design. Speedrun players go incredibly hard on the scout line to keep Alicia, their all-star, as powerful as possible, but dip into particular trees to unlock particular orders, which allow the now buffed Alicia to carry most of the game. But you can find examples online of players who buffed their Lancers of all units, and suddenly they're true tank killers, like retaliatory fire doesn't knock them out in seconds, how it did in my run, and now they can run around back and break them down with impunity. How you level your squad, how you equip your squad. There are consequences to bad tactics, but you can get away with a lot of different builds, and that's really fun to discover in real time. The Blitz system is something like a creative playground for tactics. Without modifying difficulty, it's mostly a fun, experimental game. That said, I want to touch on player retention. Almost every time I mention the game, provided a person actually played it, they'd say something like, "Yeah, it was cool. I quit playing for some reason," or "Oh right, the tank boss." Valkyria Chronicles has an interesting difficulty curve. It is incredibly easy early on, and even when a mission looks challenging, you find you only need a basic grasp of the mechanics to end it in a few rounds. Sure, you can meticulously clear out every unit on your way to the finish, you might even want to for more experience and upgrades, but you can just as easily break these sandbags, eliminate the defenders, and nab the point, ending the mission. You're ranked and rewarded for swift, tactical play. You can always run an old mission again, farm up experience, and try to break whatever mission is walling your forward march. That said, Valkyria Chronicles resists rapid progression pretty aggressively. As chapters unfold and easier missions fall away, you'll face turrets that'll shred anyone who gets close. Increased enemy numbers, you'll be limited in various ways that demand a level of respect and understanding for the mechanics. And these are all surmountable with patience, but eventually you'll also fight one of the series' bosses, the Batomas. It's a gimmick fight, sure, sweep the field of regular enemies, block the thing's progress, it'll fire its main cannon and expose its weak point, climb up, lance the radiators, no problem. The issue is, even if you destroy all of its outward-facing cannons, it's still packing a hidden one. Forget about that and you might lose your tank. and hit the game over screen, you'd be forced to restart.
Don't write in the history book that I died T-posing, please!
You might not have packed enough Lancers into your squad and get flat bored thinking about deploying again after a string of increasingly challenging battles. And once you progress far enough in the fight, the Emperor's Valkyria blows in with a battlefield-sweeping laser lance and genuine invincibility. Have fun, moron! It's such a surreal moment. Most of the game leading up to this point is forgiving, but this battle is miserable for morale, and it makes sense narratively. Of course, your first encounter with the Emperor needs to establish the stakes. It's just directed in such a way that you might need to restart 2, 3, 4, 5 times, and that becomes the story of Valkyria Chronicles. At some point, you either go back and grind or ride the very delicately balanced edge of forward momentum. The game is lean, a quick 18 missions, but there's no shame in grinding it out. At some point, some of your classes won't keep up level-wise, not that they need to, but even the implication that the player is behind, told numerically, is enough to scare players off, make them think they're behind. I didn't opt to grind, but I did consult a guide throughout the game's midsection because those missions are tough and specific. But eventually, in the last third, I locked in, understood the mechanics better, I was having fun. And I rode that energy to the end of the game. Just unlock boost defense and abuse it relentlessly. Hey you, get more defensive. Okay?
I'm dying, aren't I?
The story uses the Second European War as a backdrop while maintaining the more intimate internal drama of Squad 7 to keep the player invested in the humanity of the war, and unfolding setting mysteries to maintain intrigue. It's good at tapping into softer moments, the romanticized version of war, the way you'll read about World War combatants ceasing fire on Christmas. Valkyria Chronicles is pretty pointed about humanizing the conflict. Not everyone gets the same treatment. The villains are given a few scenes, but otherwise we understand that they're all working in service to a deranged powermonger, something that's actually expanded on thoroughly in the anime, giving the villains more depth and charisma, more time on screen, and presumably because the showrunners knew that Squad 7's story was fine on its own. You're not supposed to like the villains, but it makes for a fun companion piece to the game. I'm not sure why they chose to assassinate Alicia's character, though. She's basically a motivated girl next door, not this fluffy, pouting child. It's bizarre. One of her passive traits is called maternal. Take your pout outside.
何が妹よ。彼女はダルクス人じゃないの。
嘘じゃない。イソラは僕の。
両手を上げて。
She wasn't like that in the game. Why? Earlier, I said that Valkyria Chronicles uses a hefty amount of fictionalizing to divorce its setting just far enough from reality to avoid having to make direct and polarizing political statements, but that doesn't make the game toothless. In fact, Valkyria Chronicles still handles serious subject matter, just abstracted enough for general, any audience purposes. Yeah, it'll give you a pastoral landscape, fresh bread, and quaint rurality, and immediately smack you upside the head with the most racist people imaginable.
So, we got ourselves a fat one and a stinky one. PU. It's a regular pig farm in here.
Man, you really put the stank on that, jeez. Europa is a continent with a history. While the game centers anime World War II on Ragnite, a struggle for control over resources, the Darkson race is a sticking point throughout the series. Allegedly, in ancient times, the Darkson laid waste to the land and the Valkyrian people rose up, casting off the yoke of Darkson tyranny, disallowing them from maintaining last names, family names, and socially admonishing them into the present day. They're displaced, in tune with their cultural traditions, and discriminated against by at least half the populace, casually, freely. It's the norm. And with noted Darkson Isara being Welkin's adoptive sister, you know things are bound to get uncomfortable. Early on, Welkin has to earn the respect of his squad and gets tasked with a job the actual army couldn't manage. So he's inspired by a diving bird. Okay, so Welkin. Every time this guy opens his mouth, it's something to do with flora or fauna. It's infuriating. He has a special interest in pissing me off. It's not that he's badly written. By the way, he's just so focused on this sole interest he comes off like a single-minded Fire Emblem character, a big trope. But at least in this case, it works to make his romance a little bit more tense. because he's an idiot. And to justify his incredible successes, Valkyria Chronicles optimistically imagines a world where liking things translates to military success, which is at least more refreshing than Welkin being a military virtuoso or being ruthless. It's a rosy vision of a world at war.
Your Highness, are you really in support of an alliance with the Federation?
I guess it's nice to imagine a neurodivergent person being respected by royalty instead of being flogged on sight. You know what it feels like is splainer wish fulfillment. Oh, go on. Please tell me more.
Who let her in anyway? You really think I'm gonna work with a dark hair? I can't stand the stink of her!
How is this more biting than Bioshock 3?
In spite of your successes, some of your squad mates don't take kindly to dark hairs around here, and it's essentially where the plot finds its focus, interrogating the reality of the myths surrounding Darkson and therefore the setting, keying into anti-war sentiment and dashing undue prejudice. It's a great framework for teenagers' first war story. Genuinely. No condescension. Just by framing the unassuming and useful Isara as a victim of prejudice, Welkin as her educated supporter, and two Hicks as casually cruel, Valkyria Chronicles demands that players understand these attitudes as backwards. I just wish Welkin actually spoke up and beat back their bullshit with anything substantial, instead of trying to debate them and pivoting to actually, or changing the subject, because the reaction to in-universe racism is almost always toothless. Oh, okay, you'll punch bro for calling your girlfriend a weapon, but not your squad mates for calling your sister a subhuman. I see how it is. I love that for all this in-universe racism, nobody seems to mind the gay character, not even in the anime. Darkson discrimination goes a little further than inequality of opportunities. In Eastern Europa, so places mostly under the Empire's banner, governments still engage in Darkson hunts, meaning outright ethnic persecution, execution, or forced labor in concentration camps. We visit one of these camps. In spite of all the indicators, people get cagey about the Darkson. They're basically an analog for the Ainu people. They're basically an analog for Jews. The Darkson are pretty clearly drawn out of the way Jewish people were treated by Nazi Germany, and happen to have other aesthetic markers that make other interpretations possible. And this is kind of a failing of the setting, and the way the developers chose to be indirect with references. You know, instead of people having normal discussions about the plights of marginalized people in the face of powerful oppressors, a globally relevant narrative, they instead get caught up in the minutia of what the developers really meant by this, when the intention is so blindingly obvious it doesn't warrant the nitpicking. They're any ethnic group that was ever persecuted with military might. The game uses forced labor, slavery, as a means to illustrate the cruelty inherent to the rosy setting, going just far enough to make the point obvious without making it a recreation of actual history. Racism is a good angle for this plot, but it works so well here because war is about dehumanizing the opposition. You know, the game's first spill of blood involves invading Empire goons indiscriminately killing Gallian citizens. So when we see Gallian persecution of Darkson on screen, it's incredibly loud. Do you get to make a claim about the sacrality of life when it's devalued in your own country? Do you really think this is any different than what the invaders are doing? It only takes one person with a gun to decide your life is without value. Maybe be kind to the people around you and stand in solidarity. So it feels really good when Rosie, and to a lesser extent Largo, start coming around on Isara and the plight of the Darkson. Sure, it took actually touring a fucking concentration camp to activate their empathy receptors, but it's something. Unfortunately, Isara has to die for Rosie to have a full turnaround.
Isara.
It's the campiest thing I've ever seen. I guess you slurs aren't so bad. Maybe we could be friends. Damn. It really alters my outlook on things.
Her backstory partially justifies carrying an old wound that makes her suspicious of Darkson, but it in no way justifies beefing with an entire race of people. Genuine child logic, and the game isn't shy about it. Rosie admits it even, but to be clear, it took a Disneyland tour through horrific human rights abuses. And the death of the game's token Darkson, you know, the one who actually gets screen time, to rehabilitate this character. I just The Valkyria Chronicles is relentlessly optimistic. Speaking of, why is it called Valkyria Chronicles? Mostly to highlight the game's fantasy elements, which are the Valkyria, an ancient bloodline of magical warriors whose powers awaken when they're near death. The first one we meet is the right hand of the Emperor, Selvaria, whose powers alone threaten to shatter morale in the Federation military. That is, until Gallia gets its own.
You ever wonder, like how do anime characters feel when they're really powerful? Like on a scale of just took a shit to completed, you know, how does that feel?
You're never allowed to control Alicia in this state. It's meant to be a surprise, but honestly, the game hands it to you with Alicia's mysterious ability to interface with ancient Valkyria ruins and, like, having a passive trait that restores all her health near death. Symbolically, the Valkyria are effectively weapons of mass destruction. They threaten to invalidate armies and single-handedly turn the tide of war. This is why the game refuses to let you control Alicia in this way. While it'd be cool to access Selvaria's power on the field and obliterate the opposition, it wouldn't make for a satisfying victory. But also, nobody should wield that power. It's too much for any one nation. The anti-war sentiment is pronounced, and it's frustrating. At one point, Alicia has the chance to wipe Maximilian off the map with her power, but in a climactic moment that firmly establishes Valkyria Chronicles' thesis statement and reaffirms its romantic ideals, Welkin tells her no. He won't allow her to treat herself like a weapon. She's a human being first, and she needs to abandon her nuclear pretenses. On one hand, no, please evaporate this pustule immediately, but on the other, Welkin takes a stand for humanity. War is not fought to eliminate the other side, war is fought to end the fighting and preserve life. It's what the entire premise is built on, the idea that life matters, lives matter, even the weird ones. It's why our units have potentials, why even though they fade into the background aren't individually lauded for their successes, retain their humanity in mechanics. The plot wraps up with one final Imperial push into Gallia's capital with a manufactured supercannon meant to resemble the Valkyria's lance, which, by the way, they have to forcibly remove, thieve, from Gallia. This is important. The Darkson calamity, the crime the Darkson race was accused of, scarring the land and initiating endless wars, etc., is shown to be a fabrication, history written by the victors, the Valkyrians, to scapegoat their victims, keep them socially suppressed, and subdue them in perpetuity. In reality, the Darkson were the indigenous European race, beaten into submission by the destructive power of the invading Valkyrer, which is what left the land pockmarked and ravaged in the past. Now the Emperor, with his war machines and campaign of aggression, marks the land in the present in the name of the Valkyria. Maximilian's cannon is a symbol of everything he stands for: dominance over others, the power to eradicate anyone he likes, and entirely manufactured to fit the mold of his people's own lie. A weapon of mass destruction trussed up as righteous. Game's brilliant. Welkin becomes a teacher, Alicia gets back to baking bread and babies. We close the book on our first chronicle. Anime World War II. I left the title how I did for a reason. It communicates a few things. It implies a relative lack of respect for the source material. It's curt, comedic, but also acts as a mirror for the perceptions of others about Valkyria Chronicles. That phrase, pithy and unhelpful as it is, accurately describes how people will reduce the work and categorize it, how they traditionally have talked about the series. 'Cause yeah, kind of sums it up. It's not that Valkyria Chronicles is lesser for its chosen aesthetic, but rather that by choosing its aesthetic is now forced to walk a delicate tightrope. How do you square the atrocities of war, real, textbook-analogous human suffering, and all the silly shit? I somehow don't think Canadian soldiers had a funny fan service beach scene before D-Day. And before we get too hasty about that scene, let's be clear that it's an optional unlock and so expensive you'd probably never see it unless you were farming money explicitly to see everything on a first pass. So instead, I'm going to center this discussion on Western aesthetics to onboard people who might otherwise write the series off as too anime. This is not a one-to-one comparison, but please hear me out. J.R.R. Tolkien was opposed to the idea that his work was allegorical. He rejected the accusation that Lord of the Rings was an allegory for World War I, and maybe because he didn't want his work to be associated with the baggage that carries. Major world event, incredibly messy, comparison might reduce his own work, etc., etc. Tolkien also went to war with 3 of his best friends, naive kids who believed they were going to fight in the Great War, World War I, for honor and glory. Tolkien returned home with 1 friend remaining. He might have refused the usual accusations of allegory, but it's pretty hard to look away from the fact that Lord of the Rings, the hobbits moving from peacetime to bloodshed, is Tolkien giving his friends the adventure he thought they deserved. Because who'd want a blanket retelling of those atrocities in the fantasy space? Frodo, Sam, Merry, Pippin are mostly all about eating food and getting high. They're goofy. They're not built for the harsh realities of the world. They clash with other, more serious people. Their whimsy doesn't fit, and they suffer and grow, but they come back home. If Lord of the Rings isn't an allegory for World War I, it's definitely informed by his own friend group's experience with World War I. And you know what people don't do anymore? They don't insinuate that Lord of the Rings is just for kids or too fantastical to mean anything. People take issue with Tom Bombadil, but it's still maintained as a wrinkle of an otherwise respected work. Valkyria Chronicles isn't much different in broad strokes. It's a series centered on a fictional, alt-history, alt-universe approximation of World War II that never gets quite close enough to make a definitive connection, and that's entirely by design. The developers clearly want to sample from real-world inspirations, but don't want the historical baggage that accompanies real-world tragedies, and that's entirely understandable. Valkyria Chronicles is a video game, financially greenlit by publishers, presumably designed for enjoyably passing time. It's not trying to recreate the audio-visual reality of concentration camps. It wants to be fun and approachable, and in doing so, gives itself room for commentary that suits younger audiences better, maybe even older audiences who don't want a straight shot of human cruelty in their games. Trouble crops up in the negotiation between these clashing aesthetics, naturally. Squad 7 finds and makes a pet of a pig with wings. Actually, the pig is a symbolic indication of the group's odds of success, like the common English phrase, "when pigs fly." It's so completely jarring and ridiculous. It didn't have to have wings. It could have been a goat. Anything real. It's intentionally fantastical. Blurs the outline of the setting. What's next? A cat that's actually a gun? That doesn't happen. Don't worry. Things pretty grounded overall otherwise. And this is why I'm drawing the Tolkien comparison. These texts aren't related or of equal historical weight, but neither wants to address the obviously allegorical directly. Both employ fantastical elements and highly silly shit, and both succeed in spite of those things. And they handle these goofier elements because they're profoundly human. Something we lose in serious art discussions, in side-eyeing what we perceive as lesser, is the authenticity of the human experience communicated by those elements. All worthwhile art is not exclusively dour. Of course, soldiers were screwing around and joking when they got the chance, relaxing, being people, because while war is life or death serious, it doesn't suddenly evaporate the basic humanity of those who suit up. Valkyria Chronicles is a war story, but also a grand romance, an epic, sweeping tale of resistance in the face of incredible opposition that crucially allows for its own bleeding heart to seep through the drapery. And I go further and say that's why people like it at all. You can make an entirely different war game, swap out the anime aesthetics with hard reality, allied forces versus Axis powers, remove the mascot characters, cut the romance, slash the optional beach scene, make every interaction dreary, or at least dripping with the weight the setting necessarily demands, remove the video gamey elements, the class system, and handle World War II in a much more grounded fashion. But would anyone fall in love with that experience? Maybe, but instead of being a good World War II game, Valkyria Chronicles is an important video game, aware of the medium it's in. One exists in pursuit of realism, the other exists in pursuit of imagination. One is expected, the other is aspirational. As the war came to a close, more successful than its commanders and combatants could ever imagine, Sega hatched a plan to recapture that flickering flame. They knew that in the grand march of history, the winners are memorialized but very quickly forgotten, abstracted, lost to time, sketches on pages, and names on stone. We got Anime World War II School.
Please let this be a normal field trip. With a friend? No way!
Look, it's not as bad as it seems. Valkyria Chronicles is a strong foundation for building an empire, or a franchise. The issue has more to do with execution. Released for the PSP in 2010, Valkyria Chronicles 2 was developed to allow a broader spectrum of players to discover and enjoy what makes Valkyria Chronicles special. End quote. Which I think is gun to your cranium talk for shut those barking fans up. Losing home console status is crushing for presentation, but a better marketing call. More PSPs might translate to more sales. And people like money.
I will show feet.
You could see the dollar signs in Seka's eyes. They weren't even subtle. Plenty of extraneous material was made for those who pre-ordered the game, including the ability to recruit Salvaria onto your squad. Piles of hidden characters were also made available for those paying attention to the extended Valkyria Chronicles merchdom, with character download codes accessible from manga and anime purchases. It was an aggressive campaign and fairly disappointing to read about in retrospect, if only because the original game represents an achievement, and the money people chose to cheapen the series with tacky, wallet-punishing practices. You can't even buy this thing from a manga shop without catching side-eye. Yeah, I read Valkyria Chronicles for the plot,
Which, to be clear, I don't have a huge moral quandary about this stuff. I just, I think my line is the commodification aspect.
At the same time, in the games industry, most people aren't expressly there to make high art. They're working as part of a team to deliver a cool video game. And if succeeding wildly means getting your goddamn retirement, paying your mortgage, it's not hard to see how things end up this blatant. Yeah, chase the carrot, you goddamn animals. Indeed, Valkyria Chronicles itself, as a concept, was expanded in ways that pandered to a different kind of audience than the original. Character designs go a little further, more anime, as it were, and that's intentional. According to dev staff, Valkyria Chronicles 2 was designed with the Japanese audience in mind, more than the West, and particularly because of the continental popularity of the PSP. It doesn't present as austere or romantic as the original. Look at this guy. This guy's straight Genki, bro. As a fan of the original, its tone, which was often undercut by the more anime sensibilities, I wanted to avoid this entry most, because it is a lot of what you instantly suspect. Most of your classmates aren't unique characters as much as composites ripped from the culture cache, tropes. And tropes aren't evil or even necessarily bad, but they lean cliché by design. They're tropes because they've been done before, and seeing people you've seen 1,000 times by other names in other places honestly smacks of a general lack of respect for the authenticity of human worth and individuality in a series that's deeply concerned with those things. So, let's learn how to pop 4 consecutive buff orders on a single unit and win in one round. That's what they teach here, right? Yvonne Hardens joins the local military academy to help defend Gallia as a new internal threat rises in the post-war tumult. He's motivated primarily by his older brother, his hero, whom he idolizes for 1,000,001 reasons because he was a great militiaman and he had a bunch of irritating self-help quotes.
Your greatest adversary lies within. Wage war with the weakness in yourself.
Damn, bro, that really puts things in perspective. He meets the Alicia stand-in character, Cosette. Oh, you're an engineer? Be gone. And he finds a rival in Zeri, his Darkson classmate. Withdrawing from the immediacy of the invading empire, Valkyria Chronicles 2 is focused on the rise of a faction of dissenters aiming to overthrow rule in Gallia because its leader revealed herself to be a Darkson. That's right, this is no longer anime World War II, but the Anime Confederacy. In Europe. We're gonna burn those filthy dark-haired mongrels. Whoa! Take her down, but once the queen revealed her Darkson heritage at the end of 1, people started questioning the Darkson calamity. After all, the brilliant inventor Tamer was a Darkson, arguably the inventor of the tools necessary to win the war. His daughter fought alongside the lauded Welkin Gunther. And now the queen herself is coming out of the closet. People had their old ideas challenged, but the news is still fresh. That band-aid came right off, and so, faced with incredible cognitive dissonance from having to square their own palpable bigotry and their self-righteous beliefs, an entire faction of Gallia conspires to seize control of the nation. It's a good setup. A smaller conflict for a smaller setting, but still raw. Still real. I'm Pete Stang, like a bee sting. Oh yeah! I feel bad for the series to an extent because getting stuffed into a handheld doesn't allow for the same aesthetic fidelity. You just can't recreate the magic of the first game on PSP. You can try, you can approximate as much as you like, but now the game is a reflection of a reflection of a reflection of its original inception. From World War II an apocalyptic generation wiper, to big romantic console game, to handheld game, to funny anime school RPG.
I'm a Von Hardens. My hobbies include sleeping and eating.
Listen, the high school thing threw me off initially, but I remembered I'm dealing with anime World War II and its consequences. I checked myself, curbed that knee-jerk reaction, okay? A Valkyria Chronicles game focused on a military academy makes sense. They already handled the Second European War, so why not reduce the scope the way it's reducing its specs? Why not focus on the interpersonal relationships and romance that made the original game so compelling? And why not interrogate how awful it is that young people were historically sent to die in wars started by old politicians? Viewed from that lens, instead of anime World War II school, Valkyria Chronicles 2 makes a case for itself and pulls ahead of the original in some key ways. Unfortunately, it's still a handheld game. It's not that Valkyria Chronicles is uniquely unsuited to handheld play. If anything, it's an opportunity for more crunch, more intimacy, and maybe, counterintuitively, more content. I use that term content cynically, more stuff. It's usually the case that a handheld version of a popular game will focus on more over quality, and that is absolutely the case here. It still looks like Valkyria Chronicles. Maybe the designs get a little too silly sometimes, but the world isn't any different. It's all the same gorgeous fields and quaint towns that give way to trench warfare and ruin. It's still softly colored and occasionally streaked with blazing Ragnite hues. And of course, the students are sillier. They're younger, okay? They haven't had to pay rent for decades. They haven't had kids. They haven't had their identity ruthlessly interrogated for years or been beaten back into their shells. They're allowed to be stupid. But one day they'll know. And it'll be on them to protect the next generation or get old. Sorry, I've just been informed that they're making a mockery of the original game. There is no redemption for these people. There's no hope. Well, the play isn't much different on its face. Progression is odd. You still earn cash and experience and spend them to level your unit classes. You still buy stuff at the shop, but this is a lower fidelity experience, so book mode is gone. You don't watch a couple of contextualizing cutscenes, prepare, and do battle. Instead, you talk to whatever classmate pops up between missions, which mechanically adds nothing but its flavor, and then deploy. And this is small, maybe not worth talking about, but consider what the two games are trying to accomplish. Valkyria Chronicles 1 makes every mission count. They're the critical operations that secure victory for Gallia in the face of overwhelming opposition. The gameplay is tight, considered, and designed for novelty, mission over mission, because it's a sleek, crafted, sequential experience, a war story. Valkyria Chronicles 2 is a PSP game that wants you playing your PSP as long as humanly possible. In a world of monster hunters and peace walkers, it's directly competing for your time and makes no apologies. And that design ethos makes for a bloated runtime. You don't just pick the next major mission, you have to greenlight that mission by clearing a series of prerequisite missions, okay? You don't get your entree first, finish your sides. Oh, you're too full now? Too bloated? Eat! Eat! And like you'd expect, you see the same maps a whole awful lot because a game this tiny can't possibly contain the same breadth of the original. Space is a factor. The result is something like Hardtack, a game you've got to soften with saliva before chewing. And it's hard to applaud this from a design perspective. This is cynical, deliberately moving away from the worthy qualities of the original to better suit a market interest. And the play is great. It's more or less the same Valkyria Chronicles you loved the first time, just smaller, more dirtly, more inconsequential, owing to the repetition, but fun. There's a lot of missions, and you can even download more if you're not getting enough of your digital friends. And to be fair, the devs try to leverage this weakness to their advantage. Some of the missions are character relevant, require those characters to deploy, or only unlock after enough conversations with said character. There's a more robust sense of progression and built bonds for these goobers. You know, high schoolers will catch flack from boomers for Fortnite dances or whatever, but that resentment is bred from a desire to be cringe, to belong. And there's a stronger sense of camaraderie here than the original purely because the game puts it front and center, doesn't lock those interactions behind optional store-bought missions. That's right, you even get the bathing suit scene for free. Talk about value. Kill me. The big shakeup that characterizes Valkyria Chronicles 2 is its class system. Originally, the series began with 5 classes, but here, characters start with a recognizable base class and branch out into new ones down the main tree or the weirdo tree. You can only interface with the class change system by earning the requisite accolades for any given unit, meaning units can't simply sit on the sidelines and power up. They have to engage, and more importantly, they have to land the MVP spot to unlock certain credits. If one battle can only give out 1 MVP credit and 1 runner-up credit, and any unit needs many credits to sail down the class tree, you can imagine how much grinding is inherent to the system. You can imagine how much time you spend with any particular unit to level them up. It's a major narrative shift. Individual units mattered in the OG, but were never getting individually recognized in textbooks because they couldn't be individually elevated, except with whatever special gun you wanted them to have. Now, individual units do matter. You can simply unlock more accolades on your favorite units, sending them down the skill tree and vastly increasing their power and utility over other units of a similar base class who don't perform. And you can manipulate these accolades to some degree. You can choose the units you field and how they move. It might suck having to haul your favorite slow ass all over the map for a good boy point, but you're gonna have to level them up. And by the way, certificates and diplomas, the 2 kinds of credits needed to advance down the tree, are randomly awarded. Early on, they're also limited to main story missions. It's entirely possible to lose out on the necessary upgrade materials to actually improve the units you like. You might be forced to simply use other characters who get more lucky. I have no idea why they ever decided on this route because it doesn't even work within the school framework. I trained this guy, and it turns out God just hates his bum ass. Okay, so the mechanical narrative is no longer about how it takes people to win wars, but rather that anyone who works hard enough or gets lucky enough can be the best sniper, scout, whatever. And this makes sense, to a point. The weight of the conflict is slightly diminished because it's internal, and the game is centered on school. Of course, some people outperform others, but it's worth acknowledging because the game, the tone, morphs as a result.
Whoa! Woman!
I thought you were different, Yvonne. I thought you were gay. Valkyria Chronicles 2 is flagrant about its changes. It's a smaller game in terms of scope, probably intentionally designed to further Valkyria Chronicles as a brand, if not as an idea, but in no way meaningfully responds to or builds on the sleek elegance of the original. It's a separate experience. I was told, getting into the games, to play 1 and then 4, then to play the handhelds, and honestly, I'd say the same to anyone else. The key mechanical difference in 2's gameplay technically originates from a limitation. PSP games simply can't maintain the breadth of open space seen in the original game, so we get cordoned off zones, interconnected areas that make up the sum of any given battlefield. You need to capture the base, dividing any 2 connected areas to freely traverse them. But you don't simply waltz into another area. You have to retreat that unit in Zone 1, then redeploy them in Zone 2. Retreating and redeploying both cost action points, hampering your ability to schmoove. It's aggressively trying to limit the player's ability to win in 1 round, which you can pretty consistently do in the original game with advanced knowledge. This simple system of level division actually warps the gameplay in some pretty fascinating ways and alters the fundamental balance of the play. For example, if you manage to capture a point, the enemy computer is not in any way accounting for what you do once you pop out of that point. Spit out a shock trooper and clean up the goons on the other end. Carve a path through their ranks because you suddenly swung the flow of battle by dominating space. Because battlefields are usually 3 separate zones, each connected in different ways, there's a level of cross-zone interplay that creates entirely new oh shit moments, both for the player and the opponent. If you lose your base, your enemy can just as easily deploy and wreak havoc from that point. So to be clear, as a play experience, VC2 is different, but still has value for the interesting emergent angles its own systems create. And is it really such a far cry from VC1? Look, they've got a funny animal mascot character. VC1 would never have that. Classes deserve extra scrutiny here. It's helpful to think of the original as something like chess. Maybe not as strict or deterministic, right? There's plenty of room for things to get weird during play owing to its 3-dimensional quirkdom, but as a system, it was cropped, tight, and everything had a purpose. Valkyria Chronicles 2 however, downgrades snipers to a subcategory of the scout class. Fair enough, I can see it, and adds a new class, one that never made it to Valkyria Chronicles 4, to be clear. The Armored Tech. This class hauls a bulky shield around and defends points well with enough defense to survive tank fire. They disarm mines and reconstruct sandbags, but they're not mandatory. This is decent in theory, interacting with the environment and defending points. Even upgrading into tank-busting maulers is worthwhile enough. Like I said, for all the tightness intended by the system, it's still a little much to meaningfully contain. So the Armored Tech helps to smooth it out a bit. And in case you hate your Armored Tech, that you've sunk time and effort into farming accolades for, you can always swap over to the Fencer. Yeah, a dude with a little buckler and a gigantic claymore in the middle of machine gun warfare. Sure, man. Fencers absolutely demolish any infantry they encounter minus tanks.
Oh god, no, I didn't do that. Wasn't me.
Making them more direct shock troopers, but ultimately serving a similar role. And this is the problem Valkyria Chronicles casually slides into. It's easy to ignore the clean construction of the original in favor of fresh, new, fun. But the result is a system that increasingly blurs the lines between classes. A Lancer that can nuke regular units in an AoE, the Sniper rolled into the Scout, engineers turning into musicians and pivoting away from their tank and ammo support role. And while that opens up new opportunities for individual player expression, also erodes the elegance of the design. And it's not an accident necessarily. With randomized credits, sometimes you don't get what you need. Can't upgrade your Lancer into a proper competitive tank killer, but your Armored Tech can get to Mauler, and that's about the same. It feels like a concession to its own random nature, which is one hell of a band-aid solution, and it's unfortunate that either nobody caught it early or nobody cared. At the very least, it's an interesting look at the limits of the design space. Valkyria Chronicles Maximalist Edition. I know plenty of people who get a kick out of these systems. My issue is that the beautifully cropped intentions of the original just got inflated big and round. And maybe this is all overly dramatic. The issue is, I didn't have to fully stop progressing in the first game because I needed a Fencer to handle a problem and hadn't earned the requisite accolades. I wasn't made to look at the same environments for a full 35 hours because the original was an entirely different kind of game. But there it is. The Large 2. VC2 recognizes its place relative to the original and its reduced opportunity to tell a grand romantic war story, so keeps most of the elements that established the series while adjusting for the PSP. Gone are the opulent cutscenes, replaced with text boxes and the occasional animated scene. It gets the job done, and it's part of the benefit of, let's say, more striking character designs. They can actually carry their weight, swapping like they do between poses mid-conversation. They're bizarre, budding identities, so it's easy to stare. Okay, so it is actually possible to go too far. I don't love this cast. I am just amazed by them. We've got the small towners, the political exchange students, the feral child.
Unbelievable. They gave her feet!
And for all that visual madness, the plot is pretty grounded. Yvonne and co. train to graduate into the military proper, and they're made to handle a number of localized threats because the military is occupied or far away. Zeri catches unfair criticism from at least half the characters for being a Darkson, including from his own romantic interest, which naturally starts as a rivalry, but could you really love someone who thought you were subhuman? Yvonne and Cosette have his back the entire game, and never waver. I think these games need a Welkin, just a guy who doesn't mind diverse peoples, a guy who always sees people right. It's what makes these games so enjoyable. They don't trot out in-universe racism as some non-issue, but they also make acceptance the purview of the dude, normalize it, and it's reassuring. Except when you get into the minutiae. Zeri is painted as determined, driven, but also obstinate, unwilling to waver, which is pretty natural for a person who's trying to carry the Darkson, like as a race, forward into acceptance. You have to stand on business with that kind of weight on your shoulders, but occasionally it puts him at odds with other characters who, he says, plainly, could never understand, which is unfortunately true. Non-Darkson characters couldn't possibly understand what being socialized under those conditions would do to a person. So, Darkson reality in-universe is something that's interrogated mostly by VC1 and VC2. 2 kind of responds to what VC1 established. While the game works, while the material is basically fine, it kind of, maybe unintentionally, slides into pro-colonial, pro-empire talking points. specifically because the Darkson refuse, as a monolith of a culture, to resist, or specifically to fight back and draw blood. Zeri challenges this to some degree in 2, maybe because someone heard the criticism that naturally would arise from such an insinuation about marginalized people. So Zeri wants to fight in the Gallian military and prove that Darkson are worthy of respect through fighting, but fighting for a specific cause. It is hopelessly naive, but I appreciate that the character in particular is front and center, a main damage-dealing powerhouse, and actually willing to fight for his people's liberation instead of merely turning the other cheek. The trouble isn't as much Zeri, but Mishlet, a side character who avoids a lot of people and doesn't speak openly because of her heritage. She's told she needs to build the bridge herself by Ivan, which, given his role in the plot, only makes him look like a stupid, uneducated boob. And that's accurate to the character, but frustrating. We're supposed to take his word at face value. He's the hero, so when he tells her, hey, insert real-world minority, you'll never get people on your side if you don't scrape and beg for their affections. I don't know, it's mildly annoying. Minority groups, or at least those lacking a monopoly of power in a dynamic, are already misunderstood for free, and that ignorance isn't additionally their burden to bear. That's a mark against the majority group. That's a failing of society. This is a world that just had the Darkson myth question 2 years prior. These are young characters. They should be far more open-minded than their parents. It isn't for the indigenous peoples of the world to ass-pat their invaders and stroke their egos. But Valkyria Chronicles has a pretty interesting relationship with its commentary on Darkson. The first game handled it pretty well. It was clear, simplistic, teenagers' first racial commentary, sure okay. Whether for a change of staff or general oversight on messaging, the others get a little quirky. The actual plot revolves around the anime Confederates developing super soldiers by embedding them with Ragnite tech. Tech invented by Darkson, to be clear. These soldiers make for some of the most obnoxious enemies in the game because they break fundamental rules. If every unit has a direct counter, if the pieces all fit neatly on the board, what happens when you drop a giant queen that sucks up 4 spaces onto the board instead? Also, it's protected from being captured unless surrounded, eats up to 4 units at a time, and can jump across the field. The developers knew what they were doing to the system with the class changes. You're meant to become powerful and experiment with wild stuff to rein in the unfair advantage your enemies have given themselves. First, you need to destabilize their energy source by destroying the armored vehicles and powering them. Then you need to distract them to get a clean shot. It takes a concerted effort to down them consistently. Though I do appreciate the irony of the supremacist ideology dweebs needing to genetically modify their own soldiers to conjure up said superiority. I guess I would need to genetically modify myself if I were insecure about the canon reality that Darkson shock trooper Zeri is a huge swang and schlong.
Okay, let's recap. I had to make him a custom swim piece because otherwise the aerodynamic resistance was just too much. Because of his enormous cock. Holy fuck!
Honestly, I appreciate them for not exclusively targeting the women for objectification, but since this is a game about high schoolers, the antagonists run deeper than expected, but your immediate enemies are Gilbert, his kids Audrey and Baldrin, and this guy Dirk. You battle these people for most of the game, but part of the threat comes from within, as is Valkyria Chronicles tradition. Early on you meet this thing. Obviously a Valkyria. Why even ask the question? The hair makes it plain. Over the course of the game, we get the sense she's getting a bad upbringing. She doesn't understand friendship or soft things, and we eventually teach her to be human. After a string of revelations, we learn that not only is her mother figure treating her as a weapon, straight from the Valkyria Chronicles 1 playbook, people can't handle weapons in a humane way, but also that Landseal Academy is using students for unethical artificial Valkyria testing. The same thing the supremacists are doing. After the perpetrators are revealed and summarily shuffled off, we get her as a permanent squad member. No reaction required. Zeri really just was correct on the facts, correct on the merits. Interestingly enough, Gilbert seizes control of the capital and declares that Gallia will join the Federation, and not the Empire, who share their ideals. His own son shoots him clean dead, which I love. Of course, the fascists are gonna claw each other to death. They're monsters. Beautiful. Afterwards, you mop up Audrey and Baldwin and mourn the loss of a number of Landseal Academy students, including Zeri's love interest Juliana and Yvonne's brother Leon, both experimented on to help defend Gallia. The plot looks a little silly at 10 paces, but the narrative is clear. Those who would use other people as tools of destruction will fail. Those who help others grow and treat them as worthy individuals will succeed. It's a little saccharine, but the exact kind of messaging Valkyria Chronicles handles so well. Despite its unsubtle visuals, the game doesn't need to rely on exposition or hand-holding to ensure its messages land. It's something I'm coming to appreciate more as I handle games. A lot of experiences are kitsch, okay, beauty without truth. The visuals of certain entries of anime World War II are not as confident as others. They're wrapped up in decades of aesthetic baggage and expected look for a specific audience, but the play experience of games, the underpinning mechanics, still tell stories that transcend visuals. Kitsch can act as a container for something greater. Valkyria Chronicles 3 is a little weird. Being a handheld title, it's built on the bones of 2, but there's an interesting little dev quote tucked away in the interviews where the team says that Valkyria Chronicles 3 is the first true sequel in the series, which is the kind of statement that makes me smirk and titter like, see, even they agree 2 is sus. I know my look at 2 is maybe more scathing than fans would be comfortable with, but it's all pretty low-hanging fruit. The game was messy, aesthetically and mechanically, functionally different in ways that the team maybe couldn't account for on a first pass. So to them, 3 is the best expression of those additions and changes. It's worth remembering that these handheld titles weren't given quality dev time, each taking a single year or less to produce. It's still focused on a primarily Japanese audience. 2 was released in English, but didn't sell nearly as well as the original. It's the reason 3 was landlocked. Yeah, it's the first Japanese language only title, meaning I needed an English patch to play it, but at least it exists. Speaking of, let's talk sales. VC1 sold very well, but only after it hit North American shores, where its sales increased 400%, allegedly. It was a unique, interesting title for a console that had a hell of a lot to live up to. But it is fascinating to watch the team choose to pivot to the PSP, and especially cater to a Japanese audience in particular, for the second title and eventually the third title, like abandoning the people who gave you your little empire. Presumably because, total PSP sales should be higher because PSPs are easier to develop for than the PS3. It only took a year. They took advantage of merch, franchising. They expanded their reach in so many ways. It wasn't the worst tactical play per se, but it did backfire. Valkyria Chronicles 2 bombed comparatively. Even if its scores were good, the sales were dog shit. So much so, they did not have the funds to localize Valkyria Chronicles 3. What is there to say? Except this is necessary pretext. In the West, Valkyria Chronicles 3 is for the real sickos, and in Japan, it's comfortably known as the stronger of the handheld games. So it's an easy point of examination. How do you make all of that stack up favorably next to the original? Enough to get the dev team enthusiastic. Valkyria Chronicles 3, without flinching, wonders aloud. What if we did the S-uwu-cide Squad 10 years earlier? I'm gonna need an instant replay on that. If you can hit that hard, you ain't need a lance to kill a tank, man. Pop it right in there like it's Bloodborne, bro! It's a quality premise. If you're serious about staying grounded in the same setting and never ever leaving it for fear of total setting collapse, you've got to spice things up or risk stagnation. The PSP games are already challenged by smaller budgets and platform constraints. You just don't get to do Valkyria Chronicles 1 again. On handheld anyway. So VC3 gives us Kurt, a military genius placed in command of a penal squad for a crime he did not commit, which was never fully expounded on or investigated. He was put there because someone higher up the ladder didn't like him. He was put there because the Gallian military is corrupt. While you're still subject to the ruthlessly outdated tropes that, I guess, Japanese gamers like, maybe? How do we keep doing stuff like this? The game itself feels different. Prestige is the word. It's sharper, more considered, and it's the result of building directly on top of the VC2 framework. Yeah, maps are hauled in directly from the last game, but the additional dev time is put into polish, and it surpasses the pale expectations engendered by 2. The character designs are also mostly brought in line to evoke something resembling the original game's vibe. They might be a little out there, but it makes sense in-universe. It's a penal squad. These are presumably bad people, or at least rebels. So wear that stupid hat. Be old. Why not have BDSM costumes? I mean, really, we're puritanical enough in our own world today that seeing kink in the problem squad isn't exactly surprising. It just clashes with the lower key aesthetic, but if you got this far into Valkyria Chronicles, you know what you're getting. Of course, none of that explains toothpaste. What do you even say? It's less dramatic than Fire Emblem's Colgate character, reserved by comparison. It's also cutting to the chase, you know? Woman who likes the commander, is a scout, toothpaste, Valkyria. She's a Valkyria, it's not even subtle. Spoiler alert, guys, Riella is a Valkyria. Is this surprising to you? They didn't even try. It's like burying half a corpse and saying, what murder? Imka is also here to compete with Riella for Kurt's affection. I appreciate Valkyria Chronicles' relentless commitment to romance. I like love also. I don't know why it's always some dude in command of a pack of rowdy fellas, and why there's always someone interested in the dude, but I guess it's just the formula. Personally, I think Riella and Imka could manage some toxic Yuri. Better dynamic overall. While the world hasn't changed, it's just Gallia as we've known it, the tone slides into surprisingly pessimistic territory for this series. There is no other game where the protagonist is so downtrodden, where the squad is so massively disrespected by the world and the people they're working for. Valkyria Chronicles 1 made internal strife a reality by the end, with scheming politicians and pompous higher-ups. The sequel was cheerier by a mile, but at least undercut that levity with an internal threat, both within the country and within the military. Here, the Empire wants us dead, but we're also given impossible missions, minimal resources. We exist to die for Gallian command, and it really puts a damper on the mood. There's a point in the story where you're made to fight Gallian soldiers, and it's suddenly a miracle the war was won at all. And I appreciate the way the tone of the story clashes with the bubbly, sickly sweet visuals. This is what you're fighting to protect, these beautiful rolling hills and picturesque towns, except now you're expected to dig your own grave and walk in, used as cannon fodder. Valkyria Chronicles historically loves tonal whiplash, but this is a subtle, implied misalignment of ideals and reality that's both in line with the series' messaging, but actually convincing. The world is at war externally and internally, and Welkin Gunther's naive optimism just ain't the play in this specific conflict. This tonal shift is resisted by the absurd personalities lining the roster. They're weird, they're archetypal, but they're also not all that bad. Someone who was discriminated against, a wrongly accused person, a guy who chose to be there. You can't get a meaningful redemption arc out of these mostly decent people, even if society sucks and unfairly worked against them. In Valkyrie Profile, the PSX game, Lenneth can redeem a genuine scumbag and give him purpose, and she does this because she loves humanity and believes in their capacity for good. That level of redemption is not possible here, and it hits like a pillow. But more importantly, Valkyria Chronicles 3 maintains an absolute and total refusal to support its original cast. Listen, I hear you. Fan service is important for fans. Is that like a kind of person or something? And the sequel made a point of having Welkin and Alicia pop in so the player knew, good, they got their happily ever after. Delightful. And then there's 3. Which is actually a story about the Nameless, the Suicide Squad, and whichever famous characters they're encountering this week. Oh look, it's Squad 7! Isn't it an honor to work alongside Welkin Gunther and Alicia Melchiot? Oh, don't forget the racists! You even command them for a while and they tell you you're bays. The commander from the first game gets cameo too? That's crazy! Oh shit, it's Yvonne Hardens and Cosette. Even Zeri. They were younger, not trained for military service yet, but don't worry guys, your Aniki is here to save you. Speaking of Aniki, there's Yvonne's bro. Better have him tell us how great we are so my organs can feel sufficiently stroked. Alright, so that's just Baldrin. We're teaming up with the second game's Confederates to give them nuance or something.
We're gonna burn those filthy dark-haired mongrels.
Can we please center the story on the original characters. I complain about this stuff in a lot of games. It's tacky and unconfident in its original material. That's all. You know, story characters are actors who live and die on the stage. You don't have to haul them back in. It wouldn't be obnoxious if it were only Squad 7 and some other contextually relevant drive-bys, but these guys stuck up actual story time from The Nameless, and with their narrative weight, you know, being pre-established characters, overshadow both the player and their new squad. Because it's relentless. After a point, it feels like most chapters are crossover episodes, and seriously, I don't need my handheld. You want to write about this squad of criminals? Commit to it. Explore them better. Talk about the injustices of this society. Flesh it out, how people as innocent as Kurt ended up being sent to die. Don't just put them on the stage, then force them stage left to make room for the big names. Because yeah, on one hand, why not place the Nameless into the broader context of the war? They operated this long without being noticed or mentioned? That's silly. But they're also a small squad given no credit by command for their victories and operating in critical context while the military proper is engaged elsewhere. The plot, for its own premise, is set up perfectly to deliver an original, tragic story, but instead, it's cameo variety hour. Remember Valkyria? Yes! Yes! Get him out of here! The tone wants to be grim, but consistently undermines its best narrative qualities with callbacks. I want to be clear that members of the Nameless do have squad missions. It's not entirely barren. It's just that in following the PS2's lead, extending game length to about 40 hours or so, and most of the screen time being invaded by old characters, that well-crafted, quick-bite nature of the original game fades away, and the individual personalities lining the roster don't get the same chance to shine that they might in another game. And this game does respond directly to criticism of 1. The Nameless do show up. They interject in the middle of cutscenes. They just aren't often the focus of main story cutscenes. In fact, almost every member of the Nameless has their character development locked behind optional material. Missions that result in advancing a character's potentials and mechanically altering their relationships with other members of the Nameless. It is good. It's just all secondary to the main plot. Progression is handled well here, so it deserves a special mention. I called Valkyria Chronicles 2 cynical for a handful of reasons, but one of the biggest is extending the total amount of game for the sake of extending the total amount of game. It's not clean, it's not cropped, it's bloated design. 3 here is plenty bloated too. It can't escape that criticism without a total overhaul, so instead, wisely uses aesthetics to diminish the transparency of the crime, creates plausible deniability, okay? You're not just doing a bunch of unrelated stuff to fill time before main story missions. You're on your own, out in the field, and you've got to take the necessary steps to approach the main story mission and ensure your survival. That means disabling the local artillery fire and securing a foothold and all of that fun stuff. And to the devs' credit, it's a much more compelling progression than the do 4 missions first thing. And you're usually given a degree of control over these operations. Some of them are entirely optional, usually out-of-the-way objectives to stop artillery fire, if we're being honest, but even along the main path, you're often given the choice between 2 separate missions, because you're always teaming up with some other unit throughout the chapters, and get to pick slightly less draining missions some of the time. Wow, what an awesome sell. Sometimes the annoying busy work sucks less than usual. Can we go back to the original structure, please? Handheld Valkyria Chronicles established a series of different objectives to fluff its endlessly repeating maps. Sometimes you have to pick up a number of objects in a map. Sometimes you have to hit switches. Sometimes you have to capture a particular point, wipe out all the enemies, even defend a home base, making gameplay basically varied. It's absolutely crucial because with the sheer number of times you'll deploy, see the same stages, it's hard to imagine anyone actually rolling credits. By the way, defense missions. These are mostly fine, and Valkyria Chronicles is just robust enough to make defense simple. Armored techs have a purpose beyond their shield. They can reconstruct sandbags, and they're hard to knock off a point because grenades don't send them flying like other units. In this game specifically, they also crouch and extend their shield at turn's end, making them into mobile pseudo-cover. You can basically camp an armored tech on a square, have gunners or shock troopers lining the bags, and occasionally swap them out and heal as necessary, deploying lancers whenever tanks roll in. It's not overly complicated and fairly fun to lay back once in a while. The issue is, with such tiny maps compared to the console titles, you'll occasionally run into a defensive map where the enemies steamroll one or two of your units before you're even able to act, to dig in at all, which is fascinating and infuriating. Why would you deploy units if they're gonna hit the dirt before you can play? So much of the handheld games speak to that kind of slipshod design. The system itself is loose enough to allow players to push back. There's a narrative argument here. These guys are really tough, and they make you feel unsafe. It's maybe the first time the game actually does something as hilariously unfair as the player themselves is capable of inflicting on the computer. To be clear, it sounds like I'm complaining, but I am pretty impressed. This is maybe the first time in the entire series that something ridiculously unfair happens to the player right at the start of a mission, because your rival, the Imperial Squad Calamity Raven, is explicitly here to harass you. And finally, the enemy does something with the system that really, really sucks to deal with. This is how it feels to be them dealing with your stacked orders and your first turn bullshit. Valkyria Chronicles 3, for once, puts the player in their place. Now, bark. One thing the second game introduced was weather. The first game played at atmospheric interference, but most of the missions were fairly straightforward, only really diverging with the nighttime stealth mission that mostly exists to teach the player about sneaking, moving better. 2 introduced snow and heat, which the player could counteract with different utility tank parts, giving the pre-game planning a bit more weight, but you could pull through regardless. The third game keeps all of those additions. It's kind of amazing watching the tank degrade, going from this gunnery powerhouse that sucked up too many action points to just another unit. But look, guys, it's really important, okay, because we put air conditioning on it. You don't want to sweat out there. It's hot. Don't forget sunscreen, please. There were a few cases where I needed to gear the tank up with a rockbreaker grill to advance, but even then, it consistently struggles for a place in battle. And I think that has a lot to do with tank vulnerability and lack of mobility. Sure, they'll eat you alive in the early game, but with sufficiently bulky lancers or even repeated frontal lance strikes, they'll eventually go down. The player is massively disincentivized from playing aggressively with their tank in the first game because losing it means the end of the mission. That's why Yvonne here is a scout in 2 and Kurt is a shock trooper. You just can't put this cool thing on the board and make it pathetically, embarrassingly vulnerable compared to the average shock trooper in cover. Weather helps balance things out by introducing a level of risk for regular units that varies by climate, evens out the tank's worth. But even then, tanks are still disbarred from plenty of spaces due to their size. It's a really unfortunate reality of the series that the player's tank never really gets the chance to shine unless you invest into it to the detriment of your other unit's gear, unless you're grinding. When it's the enemy's boss tank, that'll roll 3 times faster over 3 times as much space and kill anyone in a shot. Yours, though, that's a utility. That is a Lego brick. I'm only focused on this because tanks are like the aesthetic signature of Valkyria Chronicles combat. Other than the bright blue grenades and pastoral vibes, tanks are the thing that takes up screen space, that demand an immediate reaction when you see one. But against all odds, yours never really aspires to the importance it implies. New kinds of vehicles are added in different entries. Eventually you get access to an APC option for mobility, sub-tanks even, but it's hard to beat raw mobility in a grenade. Scouts never stop being useful. The core units work fine. If anything, they should have bulked up the player's tank or made their movement better, or at least allowed them everywhere in the map. Reduced the damage from lance fire taken from the front or the side. Valkyria Chronicles 3 is effectively Valkyria Chronicles 2. It changes a few fundamentals, but the rock-solid core, the Blitz system, is maintained. If anything, this third game wants to refine the explosive changes from the second entry, make the thing as quality as the aesthetics suggest. The accolades, the class tree, are effectively erased. Now, any character can gear up as any class. Not that you'd want to swap them around, necessarily, but you're free anyhow. Some characters are actually given an appropriate class to start, which suits their innate potentials and stats, but not everyone is. And you still have to unlock the fencer, the gunner, and the sniper, which all break free from the subclass classification and exist separately now. To account for class change, you don't train classes but stats. All units share the same battle potentials, but maintain personal potentials. This is done to allow for on-the-fly swapping, like, we need you on armored tech this mission, which is neat. Feels kind of like flying by the seat of your pants. It works with the scenario. Oh my god, beach scene! Everyone get your lotion! Jergens, of course. I know. Oh, you thought I meant sunscreen? Otherwise, the maps are still divided and the gameplay is about the same. Narratively, the Nameless have limited chances to resupply and have to move more stealthily wherever they go, which doesn't really translate into the gameplay. You'd think 3 were the hardest Valkyria Chronicles game, and maybe it is. It's a challenging run, but not because you're starved for ammo or heals or whatever. It's mostly the razor-sharp enemy placements and considered challenges birthed from a full preceding game of perspective. Action points are a point of contention because they're your moves, a representation of your total available utility. Opportunity cost made manifest. Tanks were reduced to 1 action point because they never actually justified anything more. And as far as the game is concerned, a Lancer round is equivalent to a sniper round. The player would either suck up all their action points, commanding every unit to move once, or use orders to unbalance a unit or a whole group for a specific purpose. 3 decided to add more options for the player. For officers with a team move ability that lets you burn through some points for greater mobility and crossfire, letting you bum rush and burn a tougher enemy. But also with Riella and Imka, letting the player activate Valkyria mode or turning off the inhibitors on Imka's custom weapon. So, correctly, the dev staff noticed that combat gets stale when it's boiled down to its basic principles. Plentiful and stacking orders are too strong, and some encounters are unsolvable if the player planned badly, lost a unit early, etc. Riella and Imka give the player more chances to pull through. And you need them, by the way. Some of these maps are absolute marathons, which makes the relatively incredible power weighted in their moves seem more or less weightless after a few rounds. Riella's Valkyria buff makes her practically invincible and capable of one-shotting most problems. Imka's lance lets her rain down a barrage of missiles on as many enemies as she can target. These abilities are useful, but present an obvious problem. Now Imka and Riella matter significantly more than any other scout or lancer. They're the ultimate versions of these classes because they have extra utility. While this serves the story, these characters do matter, it's now another one of the ways the Nameless are diminished. First by old series characters, now by their own narratively privileged friends. The story is still interesting, all of them are, but 3 in particular. Kurt goes through similar difficulties as Welkin, having to prove himself to his squad mates. He is young, but per the text, he's inordinately talented. Basically the kind of generic, vacuous self-insert space for any given player, and hey, 2 bitches. That's more than the normal number of bitches. His squad resists early on, but he immediately wins the support of Gusurg, the tank operator, a Darkson who's actually appreciated and respected within his own troop. Guess it doesn't make sense to hold the petty mythology when your own country is against you. After a number of key victories, Kurt gets the entire squad on his side, including Riella, once called the Angel of Death for her ability to survive while her previous squads were exterminated in battle, and even Imka, another Darkson who has a mission that she's willing to trust Kurt enough to see through. You unlock Riella and Imka's abilities after earning these characters' trust and cracking their shells. VC3 once again asks, can love bloom even on a battlefield, and gives us 2 potential romance partners. Yeah, I wasn't kidding. You're meant to woo one of the 2, and your ending depends on which character you courted. I went with Imka because, frankly, all of this is so passé, but either one of them is turning into a baby factory by the end of the run. Is this the gaming Shinzo Abe envisioned? While a lot of the plot is wrapped up with pre-existing characters, helping them out and getting saved, etc., there's a more important issue brewing, a divide between Gusurg and the Gallian military. Gallia's high command is pretty apparently corrupt, or at least a handful of its old money assholes are, maybe unsurprisingly, and they're just as complicit with villainy as any Imperial. I appreciate the critique of power here. People given rank and prestige because of family names, and those who abuse their positions of power to harm others, are the kinds of people that Valkyria Chronicles consistently criticizes, and they deserve it. In a world quite literally advanced by the Darkson people, it's fascinating watching their oppressors claim those advancements for themselves, and erase the names of those who actually guided the course of history, both in the original game and here in the Nameless. The disconnect between dignified image and vicious reality comes to a head when Gusurg is given experimental gas rounds that would likely affect civilians as well as enemies. He's meant to be unaware, of course, but learns that High Command set him up the bomb, as it were, and he defects, unable to cope with the Gallian military's methods. Is it really a nation worth fighting for if it can't promise a future for its own people? It's bizarre, however, that he defects to the Empire, a place where his race is still hunted. They do employ Darkson as soldiers, though, and that's Calamity Raven, the small Harrier squad that's dog-walked you up and down the countryside. Dahao, Gusurg's new boss and head of Calamity Raven, intends to use Imperial power to find a future for the Darkson race, which sounds absurd. The truth is, Calamity Raven isn't as much an Imperial squad, but rather aligned with the Igdist Cardinal Borgia. Yeah, there's a religion in this setting. Dahao and Borgia are using each other. Borgia wants a squad to accomplish his political aims of unification through his religious order, which preaches that the Valkyria are humanity's saviors, and Dahao is promised a new nation for the Darkson if he helps elevate Borgia. Maximilian only really allows the squad to do as they please because they ultimately work to the Empire's benefit, and despite their heritage, get results. So Dahao isn't as much a tap-dancing, spineless coward as much as a politician trying to secure freedom for his people without directly leading them into conflict with the majority of Europa. Like, yes, acknowledged, his name being one letter removed from the longest-running Nazi Germany concentration camp is a little tacky, but the story checks out. The only non-Darkson in Calamity Raven is Lydia, a devoted Igdist and Borgia's right hand, ensuring the squad is aligned with his goals. I appreciate the way the game uses this bizarro squad as opposition, and the Gallian military as well, by the way, finding new interesting enemies in a world of total strife. Like for anime World War II, there isn't much nuance in the warring parties. The Empire sucks, and the Federation sucks slightly less. You don't really get a sense of unique nations clashing or assisting each other in the broader reality of the setting because every army is effectively homogenized on the field, including in their outfits. You don't know what particular nation anyone comes from, just whether they're Empire or Federation. Which I guess is a development limitation anyway. So the Anime Confederacy and Calamity Raven help lend a sense of depth to the Second European War and its combatants. I've seen critique of Dahao for effectively tap-dancing for the Emperor, but that's only true if you refuse to acknowledge the context and the three vaguely allied forces, each with a gun pointed at the other. The Empire is made of loose alliances held in check by power instead of any meaningful solidarity. I think, in the end, I do like what they've done with the Darkson, at least by VC3. We've gone from effective pacifism, certainly very pronounced pacifism, to a warrior willing to fight for a cause, to someone willing to throw his oppressor's bullshit back in their face and fight exclusively for his people while using them as tools. Dahao might lose his grip a bit by the end, but he is firmly in the villain role. He has to do something by the end instead of being an honorable badass, so I appreciate it, to a point. I don't think Dahao is a good man necessarily, but it's not hard to see where he's coming from. Someone from a race of people who were colonized, treated like absolute garbage, and entirely unfairly, scapegoated, now denied his only chance after fighting for so long against impossible odds to bring his people unto their own homeland. After piles of encounters with Calamity Raven, Imperial forces, Federation forces, etc., Dahao realizes that his chance at Darkson independence is lost, and he kills Borgia. His last trick involves activating a Valkyria superweapon, another nuclear bomb analogy. After fighting so long, the military was forced to accept the Nameless publicly, but we're forced to become Nameless right away, because this final mission would endanger international peace. We confront Dahao, put his squad down, and manage to prevent disaster without casualties. Ultimately, I think where they went wrong with Dahao, because political commentary is not everyone's forte, is having him launch the super weapon at Rangris instead of at the Empire, his technical ally but functional enemy. Taking him out under those circumstances would have been in favor of human life, as the series likes to be, without making the freedom fighter character into a yucky terrorist character. This is but another of the consequences of anime World War II. This is the only Valkyria Chronicles game, however, where the end comes without sacrifice. Imka, Riella, the whole squad pulls through, and finally free of persecution, settle into their post-war lives. The world keeps turning. While I appreciate the series' commitment to happy endings, especially for a game informed by so much struggle, it's interesting that even here, in the dark game, war ultimately feels as inconsequential as the previous titles, maybe even less so. Friends and family died in two. Why here? In the face of so much adversity, permadeath is a core feature of the original game. It stops people from playing foolishly with the lives of people we're supposed to acknowledge as people. If you had to command a squad of people you liked, could you walk them into their death? But the handheld titles both remove permadeath. On one hand, it's like, nice or something that everyone makes it to the credits. On the other, it deflates the drama of regular play to a comedic degree. Characters become resources. If you lose one, well, fine, spit out another and get back in there. In the case of VC3, it specifically works against the narrative of a suicide squad with strapped resources. These people should be dying. That is, if you want the story told through the play experience, the mechanics to feel as weighty as intended, there needs to be alignment. But this is one of the consequences of anime World War II and the way it dragged on. You can't let characters die in games this long, or else players might walk themselves into an unwinnable save, put down their endless content repository in frustration. Caught between legacy, reality, and appeasement, the fiction begins to crumble. Valkyria Revolution is $39 Canadian. I don't expect a lot from handheld games these days, especially spin-offs in a broader lineage. At some point you have to temper your expectations, but I was also excited for the game because it promised a new version of Valkyria Chronicles. I love the Blitz system, but some spice every 4 games would be nice. Valkyria Revolution was intended to be a fully action framework Valkyria title, meaning players were meant to move through environments in real time with a small squad, taking out enemies tactically and gaining control of the field. It sounded like a better Dynasty Warriors, like it wouldn't devolve into mashing combos and sending historical warriors flying into the horizon. I think it's also a game I never really came to understand. Revolution was handled primarily by Media Vision, previously handled Valkyria Chronicles 3. It wasn't a team of nobodies, and it didn't come from the void. It's possible some publisher sitting behind a desk envisioned a modern Valkyria Chronicles game unbound from its slower tactical roots. A Valkyria Chronicles for the next generation of gamers. Valkyria Revolution! No plan survives contact with the enemy. Winston Churchill. But can it survive contact with fans? Valkyria Revolution was roundly criticized, and for the first 30 minutes of play, I didn't get it. 50%? That's absurd. Look, I ducked behind cover and blew that dweeb's brains out on the field. I'm having fun. I can swap to different characters and try out new abilities. And it's a Vita game, originally. It got a PS4 port, but it's still firmly handheld by design. What, were you expecting, Shakespeare?
To read or not to read, that is the question. Whether it's nobler to reveal the truth or hide it, the choice is yours.
Why do you talk like that? Valkyria Revolution is a functioning game you can play on your console. I have no idea why you would, but you can do that. It's the winding tale of, for once, a different set of nations embroiled in conflict, but told from the perspective of a teacher informing a student about the reality of the war. 5 traitors were buried in this spot, and the student thinks they were wronged by historical records, so he asks for clarification. And his teacher was the tutor of the Jutish princess. I appreciate this framing because it's true that revisionist history can be a problem, but it's also a reality of academic history that very old premises went unexamined for too long, leading to misinformation, misconceptions spread throughout the greater body of academia and culture. And that's an even bigger problem. It's nice to see that issue illustrated in a video game, and it's why I was instantly interested. Play takes place in the past as the player controls the leader of the 5 traitors, Amlet Grandkier, at the exact point in time where they've become influential members of their respective trades, capable, in probably the silliest premise of the plot, of influencing society as a group. Amlet is a high-ranking officer and leader of his own anti-Valkyria squad. They're effectively assassins, like not exactly, but their primary target is enemy Valkyria alone. There's a lot of promise riding on those premises. Okay, so I made it a few minutes without mentioning the aesthetic. Hey, you, person who listens to long videos and doesn't watch them. Are you seeing this shit right now, dude? Can you motherfucking believe this shit, dude? Valkyria Revolution entirely discards the series' trademark, landmark aesthetic and does this instead. Now hold on. It's not because they couldn't manage. The PSP didn't make use of the exact same specs, but it still manages to approximate the original's look with the Canvas engine. No, this was intentional. If you go looking through dev quotes, you find out that Valkyria Revolution was dripped up like a painting, which is something I didn't realize until I read that quote.
Sometimes you wake up and choose to be the bad guy. I'm not gonna lie, let's be clear.
I want you to understand how completely disgusting this aesthetic is. It just throws everything the original established into the trash can to do something completely different, which normally I'd admire and respect, but in this case it's implemented in such a bizarre way. Suddenly it makes sense why characters look smudged, like blotchy freaks. They made it like that. Because originally, not knowing the painterly aspirations, I thought they just rendered 3D models like anyone else and stumbled into a jarring, kind of amateurish and untextured look that translated poorly to PS4 at that big 1080p. But these characters speak for themselves.
Literally bigger than her head.
I don't feel like I need to comment on every individual face because they look exactly how they are. The quaint charm of Rita's design vanishes, leaving only bug-eyed dolls. And it's the same aesthetic problem half of the Guild Wars 2 races have. They just look weird. And if you look at the concept art, it doesn't translate. These look fine on paper, but in 3D, with relatively low fidelity models, they kinda look like shit. And the loss of that sketchy aesthetic isn't meaningfully accounted for in the environments, where once the world had charisma, a distinct, unique, abstracted charm stands in its place flat, boring textures that happen to be oversaturated. These environments could be in any fantastical video game. These rocks could come from any MMO. That's what's lost. It's not worth arguing whether something looks good or bad necessarily. Someone surely appreciates the visuals here. But when something good is cast off and replaced with this, it's hard to be sympathetic. And let's not be overly critical here. Some of the design work is fresh, and probably would have translated beautifully to the original visual framework, but it's got a unique charm. Dark metal, speckled with light. The world is textured in a way it never was. There's an opportunity in these relatively flat, dark visuals to tell a story. And true enough, the events of the plot are significantly less kiddie than the bulk of the series, moving past the grand romance, moving past some tired tropes.
Aw, come on! Fifi's just trying her bestest!
Said some. There's intentionality in forming these visuals, even if the dollified character models clash pretty hard with any attempt at grim. Valkyria Revolution is an easy game to describe, but a challenging game to draw meaning from. Remember, the original pitch was a fully action-oriented Valkyria Chronicles entry, which sounds awesome. Not because moving away from the turn-based system is better, but because now we have 4 of basically the same game, so an action spin-off is raw potential. But like I mentioned, fan feedback altered that vision substantially enough that the actual game players got barely resembles the original concept, and that shift damages the experience. I didn't play that demo, but I can tell just by watching that somebody had an idea for something interesting, and bad early reactions made them discard it. If you're a creative, you should listen to feedback, but you really only need to listen to the stuff that actually aligns with what you're going for, because otherwise, you end up with Valkyria Revolution. This game is, in no uncertain terms, a bad take on Dynasty Warriors. You have a single melee attack button. You will not be ending combos with the triangle button to access different combo finishers, spicing up play, presumably because the game was never intended to be a Dynasty Warriors-like in the first place. And you can't do up a heap of animations last minute, so you watch the same basic stuff unfold for most of the run. Square, 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 square. You still have access to guns, but anything that isn't melee related is confined to a menu and limited by whatever resource. You only get so many rifle shots. You have to build up your Ragnite meter to unleash element-infused attacks, and honestly, the system is threadbare to a fault. Drakengard 1 has significantly more mechanics and tech than this title. Some of the only novelty is found in your selected squad. You have teammates after all. This is still a Valkyria Chronicles game, and seeing what they can do is neat. It's just that they also aren't designed like the classes of other games. They're all functionally different. Some rapidly build and dump meters, some make better use of melee or tools, sure, but the game itself isn't built around making intelligent, tactical use of these options. If anything, you end up deploying as Amlet for most of the game, so he's the most expedient pick to handle any given problem, the most obvious person to jam your upgrades into, and you only swap to other units to use specific elemental moves you didn't slot onto your captain. It's not that Valkyria Revolution is irredeemable, it's just hard to believe something this flat came out of this series. I can blame fans or whatever, but it's the developers or the publishers who ultimately decided to act on the feedback. Boss fights stretch on for absurd amounts of time. In one case, I chipped away, dodging enormous attacks, watching my squad fall one by one, barely scraping through, maybe because I didn't spend enough time grinding out side missions and pumping up my power, only to die in a single attack that entirely ended any enthusiasm or momentum I built. Handheld games tend to be focused on more over sleek, and they consistently run into this problem, and it's even more pronounced here than the other Valkyria games, because actually solving any given problem involves an amount of work that the others don't. The Blitz system is fast and flowing and neat and interactive. It's emergent and interesting. This action framework looks, on its face, better all around for a person who prefers action-based play, but the reality is so passé. So been there, done that, it's hard to imagine it sincerely surprising or engaging anybody. This is especially noticeable in the big boss battles, which manage to maximize frustration by either becoming unattackable or being too tall to consistently hit. The devs want you to mix up your melee and your Ragnite, find balance amongst your squad, and physically act like a cohesive unit, and that is the beauty of the system, that potential, when it actually feels like you're working together and accomplishing tasks. But naturally, weak AI and swapping for the occasional utility doesn't really empower any kind of camaraderie narrative, especially no better than the originals. So I'm stuck mashing like a dumbass because Amlet does damage fastest. Normally, I'd recommend people try to grapple earnestly with what the game is trying to be. You know, people don't care for dream drop distance, but it's fun and flashy. Valkyria Revolution feels like it wants players to dig in, power up a specific squad, find the means to break the system over their knee, but if you never get there, either because you can't stand grinding through what's already pretty boring to make the play actually exciting, well, that seems comparable to doing 100,000 push-ups so you don't feel disgusted by your own body. You can get a better body, but you should be addressing the underlying issue. That you shouldn't despise yourself, or in this case, you shouldn't need to fix the experience. The city changes over time as the war drags on, not in incredibly noticeable ways, minus some smog, but it reflects the protracted nature of the conflict. Prices of goods and materials rise, citizens' opinions change. It's trying to approximate the broader populace and their reactions to the war. Actually keys into social history for maybe the first time in the series. I appreciate attempting to make the player's own selfish motivations apparent as reflected by the citizenry, only it's not the player's motivations. Valkyria Revolution's story isn't as rough as you might expect. From an aesthetic standpoint, the game is already on the back foot, but once again, we remind ourselves that this is anime World War whatever, and we will not be tripped up by visuals so we can see the thing best. The names are a little different, but the set dressing is functionally the same. Ragnite catapulted society forward and acts as a catalyst for conflict. The five traitors, Amlet, Basil, Solomon, Violet, and Freet, want Emperor Claudius of the Ruzi Empire dead, but he's protected by a powerful person dressed as the Grim Reaper. By happenstance, the princess of the nation you serve, Jutland, joins up with Amlet's squad alongside her bodyguard. New to conflict, Ophelia learns the horrors of war firsthand while Amlet hunts down and slays a Ruzi general.
She was a real nympho, that one. She was a hell of a slut.
Damn, how'd you even do that?
Slut.
Jeez, man, you're gonna make me like this character. Valkyria Chronicles is so soft. Far too often to tell a convincing war story. It's preoccupied with romance, it's fluffy and overly optimistic. There isn't enough grit or friction to hit as hard as something like Final Fantasy Tactics. And that may not be the artistic intention anyway, but Valkyria Revolution takes a step towards recognizing the weight of human conflict by actually allowing its hero to kill.
Isn't this fun?
I was out of my chair screaming every time Amlet killed a guy. Sure, you've got to suffer through hours of
relatively boring gameplay to get there. But ooh mama, that's a spicy meatball!
On the warpath, you come across an estranged prince of another nation who's seemingly allied with the Empire, named Maxim Laertes. And okay, so this is Hamlet, right? Laertes, Ophelia, Hamlet, aka Hamlet. They quote Shakespeare verbatim. Now, which Shakespeare character is this one? That's why it's darker. They're actually trying to meet the English literary canon where it's at. But this is why Dante didn't do the life's but a walking shadow monologue in DMC4.
Said it. The price to pay for power?
Why he screwed around instead. DMC works well when it invokes the familiar, but parodies or disrespects it, because Dante's way past caring about the smallness of human art, human concerns, the experience, trapped between human and demon, but still engages with it to entertain himself. It works as commentary about the character. He's disaffected, but still longing for a connection to something. I'm using this as an example not to extend the script, but to illustrate that using names and aesthetics and imagery and means something, especially when a new work exists in conversation with an older one. I just don't think Revolution has anything to say about Hamlet or Shakespeare. I think these things are invoked to lend a sense of importance to the work, a work that ultimately doesn't do much with its premise. It's almost like the vaguely European imagery in Valkyria Chronicles. I think these signifiers are simply used as dressing and only become meaningful when the play intersects with them. My bit about inspiring faux nationalism in one for a beautiful country under siege. The way that relationship is thereafter interrogated by internal threats, corrupt officials, etc. But these aren't deeply human characters with relatable problems. It's a rogues gallery of clowns, straight villains. And the actual weight of the narrative rests on the 5 traitors. Hamlet still mourns the loss of the headmistress of his orphanage, Maria, and carries that pain with him in every slash of his sword. Violet's a spy who gets in way over her head because the general she woos dies wondering where she's been.
Killed in action at the Battle of Covaltus.
And she has to grapple with the inhumanity of her actions. The same goes for Frit and Solomon, who respectively influence the public and write legislation expressly for revenge, at the cost of Jutland's citizens' well-being. This guy swears a lot. These people leave a trail of corpses in their wake, and the game is significantly bloodier than other Valkyria Chronicles games. But whether because of a lack of aesthetic charisma, rough, overstretched delivery, or nothing new being said, it never quite lands the emotional impact it's angling for. Hunting down the other generals, Hamlet's squad squares off with the Reaper, who can sing. Ophelia learns she can nullify the effects of the song with her own. Sorry, the idea of a national anthem, a prepackaged artifact of nationalism being used to overpower an enemy, is so unbelievably putrid. The Reaper unfortunately looks like Maria, the orphanage caretaker who was taken by the Empire before they burnt it to the ground. So the mother figure of the 5 traitors is somehow a Valkyria and for some reason working with the enemy. Ultimately, after a series of conflicts with Maria, who was actually used as a vessel for the Valkyria Brunhilde, the squad takes her down, the Ruzi Empire collapses as its emperor takes his own life, and peace falls across the land. If you get a secret ending, the 5 traitors escape instead of being executed for being real bad boys. One of the most common critiques of Revolution is its girthy cutscene count, whose total average time clocks in at around 10 hours, which is actually about the length of the 3rd game and double the original. I'm reminded of the way every game past the first stretched far beyond that original runtime, not necessarily because of cutscenes, but from the raw amount of play they decided to support. Both of those titles, but specifically 3, because of its premise, undercut their own narratives by removing permadeath, making something that's supposed to be grim somehow just as fuzzy as the original, even a little less. Revolution aspires to dark romantic European fictional greatness, invokes Billy the Shakes himself, and manages to pad the delivery so thoroughly you'd never believe the directors looked at a famous play for inspiration. Part of the craft of theater is similar to film, telling a tight story and delivering it within those constraints. It's games like Valkyria Revolution, and to a lesser extent VC2 and 3, that make it apparent why it's taken so long to get most people on board with the idea that video games function as an artistic medium. Where's the craft? Why is the fat left untrimmed? It's why I keep looking back at that first game. the one that Sega pushed onto the handheld and, for some reason, stretched to the point of breaking. A whole decade passed after the first shells struck rural Gallia, and in those years, so many strands and vectors of a timeless setting firmly entrenched its legacy. So what did 10 years bring the series?
Another operation in anime World War II, baby!
Valkyria Chronicles 4 is a pretty transparent attempt to recapture the glory days of the series' inception. It takes place concurrently with the events of Valkyria Chronicles 1, with a conflict nearly as vital to the war effort as Squad 7's own actions, but crucially separate from those characters, which would have been nice in 3. It wants older players to step back into tank-tread ground, and new players to understand what made the series so impactful. But what's that? Valkyria Chronicles 4 is easily twice as long as the original, and I just complained about that?
How's he gonna square this one, boys?
The game was directed by Kohei Yamashita, one of the OG game's designers, but also the chief designer for 2 and 3. I like seeing that kind of lateral growth. This is a person who spent an entire decade rotating the series in his mind, and I think that's how it achieves its overall confidence. The team already had a whole lineage to work with, but they also apparently studied records of real World War II soldiers to help make the characters more believable, aiming for a worldwide audience instead of a specifically Japanese audience they designed for in the handheld games. It's the first real sequel to the original title, the only one of the sequels to intentionally expand on both the design conceits and established tone of the original. While 2 and 3, and even Revolution, have a place in the broader series, you'd be forgiven for only engaging with 1 and 4, because they meaningfully exist in a development lineage. The question is, can 4 say something new, carrying all that baggage? We start in medias res as Claude Wallace, the unassuming commander of Squad E, driving the invading empire from our hometown Huffin. Everybody listens to Claude, or mostly everybody, anyway.
Screw that!
Why do I always have to babysit unstable people's emotions, man? Oh.
But it's revealed between main missions that he had to earn that level of respect during training, overcoming his childhood reputation as Scaredy Claude. Can we get a different name, maybe? Honestly, today's kids would just call you a bitch. There was a kid in the elementary school I attended named David Dickens, and the kids would sing, for no real reason, 1999, that David Dickens got his dick chopped off. Why? Living through that reality, Scaredy Claude is maybe the most embarrassing nickname I've ever heard uttered, like the speaker is slapping themselves in the face. It's delivered well, starts hot, gets you invested, and drip feeds you the backstory as you roll along the war front. The only weakness of its structuring is...
Holy... Yep. Okay. I mean, what is this, Smash Bros?
And the early missions whose end goal isn't always routing the enemy, something I'm real efficient at. After over 100 hours of play. Like here, you can't damage the tanks because, per the story, you're not there yet. You need Riley to do it for you. Ma'am, I have Lancers deployed. I have played so many Chronicles. Claude's whole deal is the unique ability to feel a shift in wind currents, which basically amounts to future sight, because changing winds are also tied up with approaching enemy soldiers and battleship cannon fire. Can you believe this guy walks that off? Not everyone is on board with Claude, and the game uses squad perception of their commander to explore the nature of power all throughout Operation Northern Cross, a risky campaign to break the Empire's steady advance. You're backed up by Raz, the first Anarchy-type Darkson character I think we've ever seen.
So sack up, Commander.
Oh my god. He said sack. Kai, your sniper pal, who's definitely a dude. Definitely a dude.
That wasn't very friendly of you, Raz.
I apologize for grabbing your butt.
Oh, fair. He said he was sorry. And Riley, who'd rather send herself into the sea than take orders from Scaredy Claude. 5 games. Still doing this stuff, huh? And you're given a mild rival in Minerva, the no-nonsense captain of another squad. Like before, the central conflict is rooted on the Second European War, but the internal drama of Squad E drives the plot forward as characters bump against each other, learn, change, grow, you know the story. One of the game's more common criticisms involves its use of cutscenes, the general amount of text thrown at the player, the sheer number of interactions, and it's a fair complaint. Valkyria gets real long-winded after its first outing, but it's one of those things the devs were doing with intention. They sprinkle in these narrative bites, info you don't necessarily need because you'll understand it from the preceding cutscene, but they're here to set the tone. This is a war game modeled after World War II that wants to evoke fantastical, romanticized historical text, and you get that in the visuals and the specific additions with the inter-party banter and the journal entry text. It's playing at the same general vibe as the first game, but it's much more thorough in execution.
No one wants to say it, but everyone's dreading what comes next. The farther we go, the further the temperature falls.
It's not a game you chew through in a week. You need to allow the weight of the game to settle. You need to be present to make it meaningful. I see so many gaming is terrible now videos on this website, and honestly, if you stop engaging with everything like junk food, disposable toys, crack a beer, and relax with something even a couple years older, get away from the treadmill, you can find an infinite world of joy.
What's taking so...
Hey guys, yes! So huge!
Please stop! The big opportunity for Valkyria Chronicles 4 lies in establishing more of the world. Once Sega decided to keep the scenario locked in place, with every game either contained within the events of the first or occurring just slightly after, the major failing from an aesthetic standpoint was their stern refusal to open up more of the space. The amount of environmental repetition between 2 and 3 is so absurd, I'd almost recommend not playing them. And that isn't fair, and doesn't account for the mechanical worth of those games, but genuinely, playing the same levels in 2 and 3, with both those handheld titles being unnecessarily bloated for the sake of packing in more stuff. 4 is a shining chance to let players roam city streets, tread the meadows, breathe in the setting, and that's exactly what happens.
Damn.
The developers were intentional in moving away from the geographically embarrassing tropical deserts and the endless no man's lands. This series is high romance. It needs to capture a quaint, resonant nostalgia, and does. World War II didn't take place in fields this pristine or towns this decorated, but that's the strength of the romance. You can embellish, truss the environments up with details and picturesque sensibilities. Every stage is an opportunity to capture this stunning world in frame. The breadth of the cityscapes and rural towns, the raw bleeding love for this fictional country is palpable, and it slowly gives way, just like the first game, to browbeaten countrysides and eventually desolation. But critically, instead of making the setting ugly in the endgame, makes use of the expected yet till now underutilized winter aesthetic to maintain both a sense of dread and beauty at once. Valkyria Chronicles is brilliantly directed, exactly what the series needed. I think if they swapped settings after Revolution, people might have outright abandoned the thing, claimed it jumped the shark. So instead they kept expectations familiar and nailed it. And yeah, a few of the characters are kinda ridiculous. Minerva might as well be a character from 2 with hair that red. Riley keeps customizing her uniform, and that isn't appropriate combat wear. But Valkyria Chronicles is a long-developed franchise, and they're not about to admonish their own base. It's not like it's any more aesthetically jarring than Rosie, like Vice and Ica blowing in for the original game.
Yo, Skies of Arcadia rap, why the hell are we here, bro?
Valkyria Chronicles 4 is also the first game in the series to never hand the player a controllable Valkyria in the main game. The team looked at what they represent, what they accomplished from a play perspective, and determined that the player should not have one. I appreciate that because they already handled the human weapon premise in the original, no need to hammer on about it, but also because the Valkyria don't contribute to play in meaningful ways. They were an oh shit button in a game with a lot of other oh shit buttons that theoretically should need no oh shit buttons, and leaving those fantastical elements to the enemy alone helps drive home the hopelessness inherent to Operation Northern Cross. The mechanics serve the story. You are fighting an impossible war. And hey look, permadeath is back. People die when they are killed. Reaping the benefits of more powerful hardware and leveraging a decade of development considerations, Valkyria Chronicles 4 has some of the strongest, most intricate, and most directed stages of the series. They're also a bit larger on average, and tanks account for it by moving faster. Further, while the handheld zone-hopping paradigm is neat, it's a concession demanded by limitation, and doesn't bespeak the grandiosity implied by the setting. The original was tight, but now the team has enough knowledge to know what kinds of challenges suck. what works with the Blitz system. And it's probably the most consistent set of stages in the series. You break in slowly. That means it saves the bizarro giant tank missions for the end. The one stealth mission isn't only a big tutorial, and interesting new challenges crop up from time to time.
I don't like where this one's. Oh no. Okay. Oh, she ducked! Wait, what? Okay, fuck off!
It's raw action from top to bottom. You're given a lot more room to settle into the mechanical quirks as a first-timer because the first 10 hours or so are significantly lighter on the player than the sharp curve of the original's first 10. And again, this is all allowed by the hardware. While I never want to fetishize fidelity, there are examples of games, as textured and crufty as older era titles, that take advantage of hardware advances. Overall, enemies are much weaker here than other games. You can crouch and cover safely. Missions stretch on, which rebuffs any shot at quick fight play, but feels suitably epic, like you're actually embroiled in a massive battle. It creates incredible highs when you pull through, but runs the risk of the infamous, "Yeah, I played it for a few hours, never went back." Otherwise, the game does not differentiate itself in system upending ways. It's the same solid core with additions and design context from 10 years of development. That's what I appreciate the most. You truly cannot find another game like Valkyria Chronicles. Nobody, not even the closest approximations, make use of the same mechanics, and it's one of the reasons I'm actually hyped about a sequel here. Instead of calling it cynical, or a cash grab, or whatever, the Blitz system is a true original, and something you could spend months fully understanding. And mechanics matter. Mechanics tell stories. Mechanics flavor the experience. So what's new in Valkyria Chronicles 4? The two major additions are Last Stand, which allows a just fallen character to act one last time, and the Grenadier. Let's talk fundamentals. It's not all additions, by the way. The entire handheld class system was rolled back. That means no class trees, and also no music units, no armored techs, fencers, no gunners. And this all makes sense. The armored tech is effectively the tank when you get down to brass tacks. Roll in and become immobile. It swoops in, offers protection, and defense points. Bro doesn't need to exist. Fencers are a bit of a loss, if only because they were straight broken sometimes, lopping whole heads off at will, but they are effectively melee shock troopers with all of that damage loaded into a single swing. They don't fit the setting, and they don't have any real unique utility. Gunners were just god-awful shock troopers. I promoted Zeri into a gunner in 2, and immediately felt like I committed a crime. No better unit on defense, but in a pointed, tactical, active play framework, they just don't have the sauce. And the game is better for it. You're left to focus on the few pieces that actually matter, the pieces that make this system tick. Valkyria Chronicles, on its face, has every systemic problem more or less solved. The clock's innards clink on with no issue. People might decry the powerful nature of orders, but those could be quickly tweaked behind the scenes, and frankly, average players need some ace in the hole. Scouts leverage mobility and utility to act as point setters, but don't often overwhelm the enemy. This leaves room for the shock troopers to sweep in and mow enemies down. And they've only become more important to regular play since their original role as, overshadowed by Alicia. Of course, neither of these units can manage tanks, or even stand in their general vicinity without turning to mulch, which greenlights the player's tank to roll in and offer cover. The tank acts as a mobile shield, but also soaks damage, so we can call in the engineer to fix her up. There's an enemy shock trooper poised to kill anyone who gets too close to the enemy tank's radiator, so our sniper takes him out. And we finally deploy our Lancer to handle the tank. That's great. In a vacuum. The reality of Valkyria Chronicles is messy. Shit happens. A lot. And this is a game with permadeath. Consider that in Fire Emblem, the player only needs to double-check enemy movement distance and weapon range before making a move, maybe accounting for terrain, which will protect them from immediate reprisal. Valkyria Chronicles is a little different. In 3D space, you're punished for not accounting for enemy snipers, but even if you crouch behind cover, someone could still grenade you out of cover. And an enemy Lancer might still land a wildly risky shot from 50 yards and put you in the dirt. Or the enemy tank even. This stuff happens in a million contexts, in a million inconvenient ways. The beauty of Valkyria Chronicles is its mechanical complexity and the difficulty the player will have in accounting for every possible outcome. War is ugly, messy. No plan survives contact with the enemy. It's why they give you healing. It's why they let you rescue units. Even why they let you weight the odds in your favor with orders.
4 main games in and I'm still doing the same old bullshit.
The Last Stand system accounts for this by acknowledging that, hey man, you're right, shit does happen. have another go. It's got a random chance of activation, but always activates if a particular unit has high morale. Morale was reworked for 4, but the gist is, low morale no longer exists and is no longer a failure condition, which is important, because battles can truly get that swingy. Basically, you're given the chance to counterattack before falling into critical condition, if it's the enemy's turn anyway, or if it's your turn, you're left to inspire another unit or go on a final rampage. The stand-up option is appealing. It's awesome to put the screws to whoever downed you in the first place, but inspire is probably the stronger choice, provided you're not stranded alone. It'll buff another unit, refund an action point, and also top off morale, making it possible to chain inspiration between units if they're repeatedly downed in sequence. Regardless, both of these options are handed to players who get caught with their pants down, and I appreciate that.
If I've taken anything away from listening to other people talk about their experiences with Valkyria Chronicles, the biggest challenge for the series seems to be people getting through them. It's not that they're overly challenging or anything, they just feel overwhelming in the moment. Things are designed with intention. Sometimes you just fuck up.
One of the original game's most obnoxious realities has always been losing units and being forced to restart a chapter because the player doesn't fully understand the mechanics, or it didn't account for every possibility in a maelstrom of opportunity. I mean, I let my guys die, just to be clear. Melville died here.
Yeah, he died as he lived. In unremarkable fashion.
You aren't getting handed Last Stand for free, you're getting it on occasion when you miscalculate, and the unit's going down anyway. It spices things up, creates interesting new opportunities mid-battle, it shakes up the game.
Oh my god!
While the entirety of the Blitz system is hard to pin down, it still all works within a set of boundaries, and this helps the player exceed them. Now, the Grenadier is an interesting pick. Maybe in acknowledging that tanks are usually suboptimal, so much so their original action point consumption was reduced to the same value as any other unit, you're finally handed a ranged, explosive AoE dispensary, allowing players to break up entrenched enemies, hit tanks without requiring a Lancer, and deal piles of damage. Of course, the Grenadier has to set up to unload, making them uniquely vulnerable and incapable of counterattack. They're a solid defensive option as well. I can only tell you how fun it is getting mortared as a scout trying to break through enemy lines, especially when you're stuck hopping sandbags. Can I continue my fucking script? And this single edition reflavors the experience for that reason. Valkyria Chronicles was a beautifully constructed game, dynamic, flashy, and fun, but it's also highly aggressive. Each move is vital. You're incentivized in most of the games to rush past enemy encampments, avoid as much as you can to capture the enemy base and win outright, regardless of how many soldiers you're surrounded by or how much you've failed to engage with the map. It's the basis of speedrunning in the original game and even alive here. And why? Because the enemy forces are greater than yours. Always have been, since the beginning. Wouldn't be fair to slap the computer around with no real resistance, right? So defensive play can be a losing prospect. Grenadiers add a defensive component to a game that dearly needed more entrenched battles, or at least the chance to have more entrenched battles without simply overpowering the enemy force and flooding the board with units. Because you can dodge incoming mortar shells, but you have to risk something to sneak by. It's tense, it's engaging, it slides in so well you barely notice. The enemy can't bum rush you without severe consequences, not that they historically did, but in case you missed some of those VC3 missions, the fundamental issue with giving the enemy strength in numbers and units they don't care to preserve, and tiny maps on that note, was losing sometimes 2 or more units before you ever got your turn, before you were even allowed to crouch behind cover. If you field Grenadiers, slowly creep forward with defensively positioned shock troopers, Valkyria Chronicles 4 can feel much more like grand warfare than the slightly bizarre mechanical shit show it has the capacity of devolving into. The increased field size also requires greater mobility, so players have access to an APC unit a la VC3. It's one of the consequences of larger stages. Invariably, someone pulls ahead while you chase some critical strategy, while others linger behind.
So expanded field size, more entrenched battles, and greater mobility. Valkyria Chronicles 4 is epic. I think of it so highly because of its place compared to Valkyria Chronicles 1. 1 was a tight, cropped, and fairly abusable game. It's a little bit more mechanically colorful in the sense that you can just entirely overpower anybody and win the game in completely ridiculous ways. But Valkyria Chronicles 4 is maybe the most robust anime World War II simulator. They're going for entirely different things, which gives both a unique and important place in the broader lineage. And that expansion, that extra strain of consideration, is also given to the squad.
The squad is at the forefront, teaching the player new orders where once stood the old man in one, and side missions open up for trios of the expanded cast, giving you more insight into Squad E.
Yeah! Surprise, dipshits! Die, die, die!
My insight is maxed and madness has set in. Now, in spite of these additions, the weakness is that the game's story is handled like one. The main cast is all you see except for extraneous material, and just like 3, your main units, Kai, Riley, Raz, etc., each provide an additional action point in combat, making it actively detrimental to ignore them. Valkyria Chronicles, as a series, struggles to make its rank and file count, but it's also a reality of game dev, even storytelling. No shot 40 people can mean the same amount to a focused plot. And I didn't want to say anything, but this woman is visibly drunk.
And I'm super sober, so don't worry, it's fine.
Maybe the worst thing about all this expansion, all the complaints about text boxes, is illustrated best with the ship. Eventually, the game turns from fun, flashy battles in the colorful countryside to dead winter, and you're holed up in a ship as your base for most of that time. Actually, about 2/3 of the game takes place in and around the ship, which makes for a huge drain on variance. It's pretty clear why they front-load all the diverse, beautiful landscapes before snuffing it with snow. They want you invested so you don't bounce. And it's tonally appropriate. The player is locked in a seemingly doomed conflict with no magic win button, no Valkyria, and that makes for a much more harrowing war story than whatever the first game was doing. The Centurion, your battleship, actually factors into combat. You can request healing, bombardments, and even a tank if the Hafen is destroyed. These options help illustrate the enormous scale of the conflict and match the broadened scope of the game. But it's truly bizarre to see so much power and utility designated to a battleship. It's a vehicle the game wants you to rely on, even form a bond with. And it's not by mistake. Commentating the plot of these games is fascinating specifically because of the first game. Everything hinges on that title and what it established. A whole timeline was crafted in and around that game's events. Now we're given perspective on a mission that's crucial to the outcome of the war, that we've somehow never heard of. Early on, we learned that Squad E's Kai actually took the place of her brother in a more or less Mulan situation when he suddenly vanished to do something important. Operation Northern Cross begins and the squad cuts through invading Imperials in a handful of critical missions with the intention of piercing directly into the Imperial capital of Schwarzgrad. You know, what the Empire ultimately tried in 1. Squad E pulls through and actually does break deep into enemy territory, also breaking the apparently impenetrable Sigbal line with a combination of teamwork, Claude's innate ability, and the raw element of surprise, but it's a short-lived victory. Winter comes early and puts the freeze on the Federation army. With supply lines stretched thin and harried by multiple aggressors, they're pushed back and hope seems lost. This is how you end up on the ship, or rather, in a pack of super advanced snow cruisers, which are the Federation's last chance at piercing the heart of the Empire.
I said it and I meant it. I'll never let a soulmate get away.
What is the obsession with this character archetype? Why is there always a big guy in a big tank with a bigger dick than anyone else on screen? Every game, except 2. Jaeger, the How, this game. Man, you can't just copy your own homework all the time. So it turns out I was just completely wrong about that. While Claude and his crew wrangle with their new situation, perspective shifts to Walls and his new unit, headed by the scientist Heinrich Belgar. Oh, so that's Kai, that's the game's Valkyria, and these, God. This is the thing about anime World War II, it's fighting your kind words. There is no justifiable excuse for why you try to create super soldiers in the form of these things. They're small, inefficient, you've equipped them with crossbows for some reason. It reminds me of Black Lagoon, actually, which leverages wry humor and over-the-top action sequences and all these tacky and grimy elements to paint a portrait of a criminal underworld that's at least spicy enough to want to look at, human in spite of the madness, and all acting as a visual front for some of the most pointed socio-political commentary I've encountered in an anime. And then it hits you with the twin. Yuck. Fuck. The twins in VC4 aren't a work-invalidating feature, just a clumsy fascination. The super soldiers in 2 had no spice. Tin cans aren't inherently unnerving, these are. They accomplish their narrative goal while ensuring we assume the absolute worst about Belgar, about the Empire, and even about Kai for associating with these people. Neither Belgar nor Kai can control their subordinates. Primaria attacks the Centurion, defying direct orders, and the twins also fail to rein themselves in, and so Belgar abuses them into compliance. It's the same narrative thread the first game ran on. People cannot responsibly handle power, and no person should be treated as a weapon. Valkyria Chronicles 4 is a little different than the original, though. It was a more naive world. Welkin challenged authority and succeeded multiple times. The one bad guy backs off of his own volition for honor's sake. Damn, wouldn't it be nice? While tensions sparked and flared at different times, Vulcan managed to assuage everybody with raw ability, spoke freely with the Queen, etc. He's a more naive kind of character, not really in tune with reality, but Claude here is. He's defined by his past failures and the work he did to change. Claude is significantly more grounded, and even still, with mountains of successes under his belt, he gets consistent, scathing criticism from the people around him. When the tension boils over, he doesn't simply diffuse it like Welkin, he has to take it on the chin. It's a seething experience, sometimes earnestly uncomfortable.
You'd have to be stupid or insane to believe we can turn this into some storybook victory. I've always hated you. Ever since we were at the academy. Always spouting your idealistic bullshit, like you've got it all figured out and nobody else gets it.
And that makes 4 more successful at landing the dark tone 3 wanted so badly. Because here, you feel it. In cutting words, in the overwhelming battlefields, in character depth. The darks in question is mostly ignored in game. If anyone gets too bigoted, Raz is liable to slap their whole shit off, and maybe it's for the best. The series was fixated on that issue for most of its runtime, and the breather is healthy. I think trying to make meaningful racial commentary game over game left different writers scrambling to make worthwhile material. And some of it was just awful, so they gave the player an imperfect hero, a bro, and let the dynamics settle without a perpetual interrogation. And acknowledged, you still have darks and haters in your squad.
I'm not racist, but
people don't like Raz for free, and he's kind of a frustrating personality to deal with, especially early on. What I like about VC4 is that it acknowledges its place compared to the original game. It's not going to hit you over the head with a very large stick about this issue because these issues have been discussed at length in the first, the second, and third game. Now it's going to boil down the darks and experience and that reality into the play experience. You know, people bump up against Raz. Racism is still very alive, but it doesn't feel like it needs to make a PBS special out of the whole ordeal. Newcomer players probably won't understand why anyone has an issue with darks and how these people could ever be perceived as really controversial outside of, the guy being stupid. It normalizes them by humanizing them. Eventually, the party finds a mysterious girl aboard at the same time as the ship's main engine goes offline. You gotta keep telling yourself, man, don't react, it's Valkyria things, it's fine. Her origins are a mystery, but everyone latches onto her fast. We eventually learn that she's a Valkyria and we won't be controlling her, thankfully, because she's a child. We watch one of the ships go up in smoke after an attack, leading to an enormous explosion. That's not a normal explosion. I don't like where this is going. To escape the blast, Angie heads back to the ship's engine where she originally emerged. They're using the anime girls as super fuel, bro. They're using anime girls! With this single revelation, VC4 instantly calls the Federation into question and answers the, well, if there's 2 Valkyria in the first game, where's all the rest of them? Being systemically rounded up by the Federation and used as ship engine. What were you expecting? Trained soldiers? No, we also built a bomb that the children Valkyria are fit in to use as nuclear arms. Level whole cities. By the way, that's what this operation is. Take the anime girl and inflict her on Schwarzkopf. I gotta hand it to him. This is evil. If Welkin were here, he'd say, no, you're more than just a weapon, and there's always another way. Claude just reluctantly agrees. I appreciate that Valkyria Chronicles minces no words about war and its toll. It's ugly, unnecessary, it turns people into monsters. Super weapons are a blight, and every protagonist knows it. In fact, it was super weapons in the hands of an invading oppressor
the Valkyria, which caused the Darkson situation at all. Wielding the nuclear analog irresponsibly is explicitly the purview of the villains. Every main character resists it. Welkin actively refuses to use Alicia in that way. Valkyria Chronicles 2 has you humanize Alias. In VC3, Toothpaste is aware of her power and refuses to use it except to protect Kurt and his squad. VC4 just doesn't give you a Valkyria, except Angie eventually, and then pops the question, are you willing to drop the bomb? It's the best scene in the game. Minerva and Claude arguing over the merits of ending the conflict decisively. But dropping that bomb would not be murder.
It's genocide.
There's a hint of the series' trademark softness in there. Anime World War II gets to tell a version of history where the bomb was never dropped, where Barefoot Gen was never made, where human life matters. Valkyria Chronicles is fascinating for being a work that romanticizes the West told from a Japanese perspective. The greatest consequence of anime World War II is creating a parallel vision of Western chauvinism where the superiority complex is actually earned. There is one other significant spoiler moment I want to talk about. Pre-warning. The party stumbles into a trap and you're made to send Raz to his death. This moment is so much of what Valkyria Chronicles aspired to in the past but failed to accomplish, and probably because of its RPG roots. Valkyria Chronicles is a war story. The only people who are allowed to die are your regular troops. Not Welkin, not Alicia, not Yvonne, not Riella or Imka or Kurt. Having to control Raz in his last defiant cry in a frozen war zone against an empire that hates him merely for being alive is more poignant than any confabulated anime child tragedy, and actually strikes the chord the original never could by sacrificing someone to win the war, not to change one character's attitude.
Hey, you got a light?
VC4 knows you're in too deep to get handed a win for free. But in a wind-shocking rug pull, your push into the Empire's core is cut short when the Empire offers a ceasefire, ending the war in a blink. Raz lies dead. Angie made it out. There's a final battle to fight against Belgar, who can't stand not completing his research, but the absurdity of war is written so plainly in such a small word. Ceasefire. No one's an enemy anymore. We're forgiving the Darkson hunts. Suddenly, Raz is buried, for nothing. With the pull of a diplomatic string, the game's momentum halts. I think it might leave a bad taste in someone's mouth, but writing about it, I'm impressed. You still get your final battle, but it's such a stunning critique of international conflict, struggling so hard, for so long, only to be told to pack up and go home, when your crosshairs hovering over their main base, just when you're about to take revenge for your fallen comrade. And you just stare. It's a finale that champions human life over bloodshed, promises gradual change, provided the ceasefire isn't just pretext to another conflict. It's the kind of ending that illustrates the nature of war much better than a decisive victory can. Valkyria Chronicles 4 recognizes that these warring nations have existed for centuries, longer than any living person, and that a simple operation couldn't meaningfully resolve what's going on. Video games that tackle war as a concept frequently fall into this trap, or if they're a little more savvy, recognize that most victories are temporary, and here, you're not given even that. You're left on freeze. The Darkson are still treated like garbage, everyone still hates each other, and the world turns, like nothing ever happened. It's so easy to snipe and snark at a series like this because of the way it presents itself. Pet pigs with wings, little anime girl bombs, gigantic swangin' breasticles. What do you say? Nothing. Nothing about that because it's a trap. I want to criticize the juvenilia and the adolescent spirit of the series writ large, but I don't think you get Valkyria Chronicles without it. I think that version of the game would be colorless, lifeless. I think it wouldn't invite conversation. I think it wouldn't obsess people. I think Valkyria Chronicles is tapped into a very primal reality of the species and sings it proudly. If it's true that people are unique and worthwhile and we need to celebrate that fact to truly belong to and for one another, which is maybe the ultimate human ideal, instead of maintaining stern, solemn rigidity, then Valkyria Chronicles understands what it means to be human, in all its mechanical hues and its uncertainty.
in its absurdity and its pain, to be a bright, flickering flame in hopelessly confusing times. Rain's coming any day, but for now we're just dancing under slightly cloudy skies.
Hey, it's K-Bash. Huge thanks goes out to my $4 patrons. Check them out. Beautiful. And double special thanks goes to my extra generous patrons who are Adam Welsh, Air Pirate Sid, AK, Acropolion, Alfred Correa, Alpha 42, Ampersand, Andrew, Redacted, Angel Rivera, Anthony, Aria, Aaron, Ashley, my wife, my darling. I asked K-Bash to make you smile. Also, hi, Merrick, Azrael, Azura, Erlof, Atticure, Axinate, Bear Skeleton, Basement Dweller, Bosch 7, Be Gay, Do Crimes, Bella, more like Smella, Ben M, Beguile, Big Papa Spray, Blink Against the Machine, Wargle Hargle, Blossom Dante, Boom Dead, BH Operator, Born in Shadow, Brandon S, Brandon Hesse, British Gooch, Cow, Cajun Lady, Cakesar, Can I Cuss on Here? C-Dub, Casual Male XL, Catgirls Are Real, Caesar T, Chef Cow, Hero Hero, Court Fox, Cordit, Chris Bromo, Cody Golden, Comfy Moogle, Commie Hug, Couch Mocha, Cosmetic, Crabmonger, Fish Finagler, Crashgers, Crater, Crispy J, Mono 19D, Cup of the Puppa, CW Glassworks, Stag, Swaggy David Castillo, Dara, Dash Granny, Decode, Deadword, Dead, The Strega, Dingus Bat, don't read this out loud, oh no, he did Doodle Flu, Doug Prince, DJ, Professor K, Dr. Cullen PhD, Drop the Bait, Duffman, The Protagonist, Dylan Winston, El Jaguar, Elpio, Elsa, Emperor Pickle, Empty Tension, Eric Monticello, Excalibur Shine, Exorian Hagen, Gnar, Fail Knight, Perkins just happy to be Burns here, Maximum, Fuzillion, Forte Noir, Frog Vorvis, Frosty _Gamer _ Gandalf the Gay, Garen Guarantee, Gigglebite, Glasses Kohai, Glyph Seeker, Nine Cat, Dobo Bobo, Goose 6112, Gregor 700, Gray the Darkest Black, Corey, Gucci Plant, Hatsune Miku's Crack House, Archive, Demon, Game and Station, Hermit J, Hi Pixie, Hebe, Boon Jigger, Honey Mutt, Horn Tiger, how do you know? Huey. I just took 7 grams of magic mushrooms and now I'm lost in the woods. I'm supporting K-Bash just because I wanted to make this part of the video longer. Inferno galore. Ingenious Clown. IOBG. I punched a sandwich. It's not bad. It's time to sue. It's not good. Ivy Ruth Langley. Jack Hydrick. Jacob. Jalopy. James. Dams. Jank Dankins. Jason Lasky. Jaden. James Vaughn. Jar of Screaming Eyes. Jay Drito. JL Savarus. Jay Deus. JK Hedgehog. John Bo the Joker. Jordan Joyner. Jorzy Burden. Juicy Frost. June. K-Chan. Keegan Too Cool. Keith the Thief. Key the Iron Idol. Kata Snack. King Kuma. Key. Janite Pike. Kitty Caddis. Clock. K-Noe. Cone 2020. Crated. Crazy Dark Chocolate. Cropeton. Heist. Kyle. None. That Kyle. KZ Excellent. Lady Weed. Laundry Mob. Lego Sid. Lethal Nibbles. Linkle. Little Big Trouble. Loathsome Dung Eater. Lion Shard. Juan. Low Res. Low Fat Moger. Lucas Boy. Blood Mac James. Lunati. Magic Meows. Malamatic Wolf. Manapool. Manic Pixie Space Pirate. Now Fever. Mara Ganger. Marcules. Marcus Rambles. Maxwell B. Maximum Dog. Meaty Smack. Mechanized Memories. Maple Puppet. Mega Boy E Nasty. Melly 10. Metal Gear Gaseous. Michelle Citrano. Mike DeViar. Mikusagi. Lynn Adams. Moa. Bobby Dobby. Big Titty Gok GF Cooley. Monochrome Only. Monochrome Rainbow. Morgana Black. Maury. Mort. Modi. Mr. Pee Pee Poo Poo Kaka. Mr. Yeety Dabface McYoink Bomb. Mirna. Naira New. Nito Torpedo. Neon Dwarf. Nick Krishna. Nifty Rex. Not Nobel. Nuggy. Okami. OJ McMuffin. Old Burgle. Old Man Cranberry. Ollie. Omni Nerd Zero. 137. Only LK. The Plant. Oscar. Paperlandy. PBK. Pandemic Cowboy. Pelagic Undulation. PK Gaming. Mike. Popular Hitman. Prismatic Dan. Pringle Prongle. Pringle Prongle. Probably not Grady. Project Darklight. Punch Fighter Champion. Ponosaurus Rex. Quasar McDougal. Quillworth. Raging Ataraxia. Real Beans. Reggie Rodriguez. Renteca Bond. Ringed Relay. Rowlet's Bowtie. Roy Londo. RP Gamer. Ryan Michel. Saigon Man. Salsa. Salty Smasher. Gabrius. Scribe Slendy. Sakai no Hawarda. Sensual Coder. Saphirium. Sexy Bionicle GF. Sergeant Shipwreck. Shaw. Nintendo. Shut up, Wesley. Silver Bear 909. Sin. God! Sir Doodle's alive. Seriously tired of waiting in line. Sir Newt. Sir Giggles X. Sir Slurpsalot. Sir Speedster. Skyward Lead. Sleepy Wabbit. Slippy Sloppy Bippy Boppy. Snart. Small Turtle House. So Zeta Dad. Sock'em Bopper. Suckdolager. Space Lizard. Sports. Spider Dad. Squidged. Squishword. Star Night Sky. Streffin Battle. Super Dingus. Super Sandwich Guy. Taya Toxin. Shorn Chubbington. Terrence Swift. The artist formerly known as Sam the Sam. The Big Bubby. The Clown Prince of Cringe. The good Lord has blessed
Accept me, hallelujah!
The Green Loki.
The Crispy Boy. The original Nars's Diet Thick Dew trademark Neo edition.
The Peacemaker Pyro.
The Salt
The
Knight.
Nomad.
The Real McCoy.
The Toasted One.
Dick Mystic.
Thresh.
Rips Heart.
Tiggles McGuffin.
Tim Lobster.
Timid the Writer.
Tony Jones.
The Legend.
Total Play.
Travis Edwards.
Tropical Avera.
Twiddle Chungus.
Ty Guy 9001.
Type A Grapefruit. Unlawful Skies Crippling Gotcha Addiction.
Vid.
Vacant Plaza.
Valenris.
Venom.
Vice Plot.
Video Gore.
Vic.
Volcendo.
Joaquin, get right in my bag.
Waposa.
Wayne is boss.
We are so back.
Weed Trash.
Waylon.
Where am I? Help.
Whiskey Dodo.
Widgie. Winter Solstice.
Win TV.
Wrenchim. Zanny Tanner.
Sean D.
Stravius.
Your boy Flyers.
Yero 12.
Yashichi.
Yay Kundo.
Zachary
Livesey.
Zachary D.
Zanasso.
Zane the Impure.
Zane the Pure.
Zed Slayer Gamer.
Zero Salazar.
Z-Nova.
Cyberbunk.
If you'd like to help support the show, unlock new long-form projects, and help me keep improving, check out my Patreon. We got lots more videos in store. Stay tuned for more. K-Bash out.